The courtroom went dead silent when the judge read the charges. Unfit father, two little girls torn from their home, a widow nobody wanted, dragged through hell one more time. But that's not where this story begins. It starts with a woman too big for her own town, a man too broken to ask for help, and two children who'd forgotten what safety felt like. This is the story of Eleanor Graves, the woman they threw away, who became the one thing a dying ranch couldn't live without. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The eviction notice came on a Tuesday. Eleanor Graves sat at her kitchen table staring at the paper like it might catch fire if she looked hard enough. 3 days. That's all they were giving her. 3 days to pack up 8 years of marriage, a lifetime of memories, and disappear from Millerville like she'd never existed at all. Her hands shook. Not from fear. She'd burned through fear weeks ago, right around the time the church ladies stopped bringing casseroles and started crossing the street when they saw her coming. No, her hands shook from rage. Pure, cold rage at a town that preached charity on Sundays and practiced cruelty every other day of the week. "You still here?" Eleanor didn't bother looking up. She knew that voice. Constable Webb, with his thin mustache and thinner patience. "I'm reading," she said flatly. "Well, read faster. Landlord wants you out by Friday morning. That gives you—" "I can count, Mr. Webb." Silence. She could feel him shifting his weight, uncomfortable. Good. Let him squirm. "Look, Mrs. Graves, I'm just doing my job. It ain't personal." Now she did look up. Eleanor was a big woman. Not tall, but broad-shouldered, solid, the kind of build that came from years of farm work and a body that refused to apologize for taking up space. When she met Webb's eyes, he actually took a step back. "Nothing about my life has been personal since Thomas died," she said quietly. "Not the funeral where half the town whispered about his debts. Not the ladies' auxiliary that stopped inviting me to meetings. Not the shopkeeper who suddenly can't extend credit anymore. And certainly not this." She tapped the eviction notice. "So don't stand in my kitchen and tell me it's not personal, Mr. Webb. Everything is personal when you're the one being erased." Webb's face flushed red. "You got 3 days," he muttered, and left without another word. Eleanor sat in the silence that followed, listening to the clock tick on the wall. Thomas had bought that clock in St. Louis, back when they still believed the future would be kind. She should probably pack it. She should probably pack everything. But her body felt like lead, too heavy to move, too tired to care. The truth was simpler and more terrible than anyone in Millerville wanted to admit. Her husband had died owing money to half the town, and Eleanor had nothing left to pay them with except her absence. So they'd take that instead. Wrap it up in legal language and civic duty, make it clean and proper and righteous. But it still felt like being thrown to the wolves. By Thursday afternoon, Eleanor had packed what little she could carry. One trunk. That's what 8 years of marriage came down to. A faded wedding quilt. Thomas's Bible. Not that she'd opened it much since the fever took him. A few dresses that still fit, and the leather pouch. She held it in her hands now, turning it over slowly. Thomas had pressed it into her palm 3 days before he died, his eyes bright with fever and something else. Desperation, maybe. Or fear. "Don't open it unless you have to," he'd whispered, his voice barely audible over his rattling breath. "Promise me, Ellie. Only when there's nowhere else to turn." She'd promised. Made the vow to a dying man and kept it even when the hunger came, even when the landlord raised the rent, even when she sold her mother's silver just to buy flour. The pouch sat at the bottom of her trunk like a secret, like a loaded gun she couldn't bring herself to fire. Not yet. Not while she still had $3 to her name and a spine that hadn't quite broken. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Eleanor almost didn't answer. She'd had enough of constables and landlords and church ladies with their tight-lipped sympathy, but the knock came again, firmer this time, and she hauled herself to her feet with a sigh. The woman on her porch was a stranger, 50-ish maybe, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and forgiven too little. She wore traveling clothes and carried herself like someone who didn't have time for nonsense. "Eleanor Graves?" "Depends on who's asking." The woman's mouth twitched. Almost a smile, but not quite. "Name's Judith Kern. I run a domestic placement service out of Cedar Falls. May I come in?" Eleanor stepped aside without a word. What did it matter now? The house wasn't hers anymore anyway. Judith didn't waste time on pleasantries. She sat at the kitchen table, pulled out a leather portfolio, and got straight to business. "I heard about your situation," she said. "Small towns talk, and word travels. I'm here because I have a position that needs filling immediately, and frankly, you're the only woman desperate enough to take it." Eleanor blinked. "That's quite an opening." "I don't believe in sugarcoating." Judith opened her portfolio, revealing a single sheet of paper covered in neat handwriting. "The job is housekeeper and caretaker for a widower and his 2 daughters. Remote location, very remote. Iron Ridge Mountains, about 60 miles north of here." "I know where Iron Ridge is." Eleanor had heard stories. Brutal winters, isolation that drove people mad, ranches so far from civilization that folks went months without seeing another soul. "Then you know it's not for the faint of heart." Judith slid the paper across the table. "The pay is fair. Room, board, and $30 a month. The work is hard. The man is difficult. And the daughters—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "The daughters have driven away every woman who's tried to help in the past 3 years." "How many women?" "7. Eleanor let out a low whistle. "What's wrong with them?" "With the girls? Nothing that loss and grief haven't caused." Judith's expression softened slightly. "Their mother died in childbirth. The baby didn't survive either. The older girl, Rose, blames her father for not getting the doctor fast enough. She's 14 now, angry as a hornet, and twice as mean. The younger one, Ivy, hasn't spoken a word since the day her mother was buried. She's 8. Something twisted in Eleanor's chest. She knew what it was like to lose everything. She knew the shape of grief that had nowhere to go except inward, festering like an infected wound. "And the father?" "Caleb Mercer. Good man, by all accounts. Works himself to death running cattle on land that barely supports it. Hasn't smiled in 3 years. Hasn't really lived either, from what I understand." Judith leaned forward. "I won't lie to you, Mrs. Graves. This isn't a fairy tale. This is hard labor in a hard place with hard people. But it's a roof over your head, food in your belly, and a chance to start over somewhere nobody knows your name." Eleanor looked at this paper. The handwriting was masculine, blocky, like someone unused to writing letters. The whole thing was maybe 10 sentences long, listing requirements and wages with no embellishment. Must cook, must clean, must not run off when things get difficult, must understand that this is a working ranch, not a finishing school. She almost laughed. At least he was honest. "Why me?" she asked. "You could have placed this position with any woman between here and Cedar Falls. Why track me down specifically?" Judith met her eyes without flinching. "Because you're out of options, which means you'll fight harder to stay. Because you're not some delicate flower who'll faint at hard work or crude language. And because—" She hesitated. "Because Caleb Mercer specifically requested a woman who wouldn't expect romance or courtship. He was very clear on that point. This is employment, nothing more." Ah, there it was. The real reason. Eleanor was too big, too old, too worn down to inspire any foolish notions. She was safe, sexless, a workhorse instead of a woman. It should have hurt. A year ago, it would have. But Eleanor had run out of tears somewhere between the funeral and the eviction notice. "When do I start?" she said. The journey to Iron Ridge took 2 full days by wagon. Judith drove. Apparently the placement service included transportation, which Eleanor supposed made sense. Can't have your employees dying of exposure before they even reach the job. They talked very little. Judith wasn't the chatty type, and Eleanor had nothing to say that wouldn't sound like self-pity. Instead, she watched the landscape change as they climbed into the mountains. The gentle farmland around Millerville gave way to rocky hills, then steep ridges covered in pine. The air grew thinner and colder. By the second morning, Eleanor could see her breath when she woke. "We're close," Judith said around noon, guiding the horses up a narrow mountain road that looked more like a deer trail than anything meant for wagons. "Another hour? Maybe less." Eleanor didn't answer. Her stomach was doing complicated things, twisting itself into knots that had nothing to do with the altitude. This was it. The last chance. The final door before she ended up sleeping in ditches or begging for work in some city where she'd be even more invisible than she was in Millerville. She touched the leather pouch in her pocket. Still there, still unopened, only when there's nowhere else to turn. Not yet, she told herself. Not today. The Mercer Ranch appeared suddenly around a bend in the road that opened onto a high mountain valley. Eleanor's first thought was that it looked lonely. A weathered house, a barn that leaned slightly to the left, a few outbuildings that had seen better days. Cattle dotted the fields beyond, dark shapes against the brown grass. Everything was functional, practical, stripped of any decoration or warmth. A working ranch, not a home. A man stood on the porch as they approached, tall, rangy, with dark hair going gray at the temples, and a face that might have been handsome if it hadn't been carved from stone. He wore work clothes and held himself like someone who'd forgotten how to relax. Caleb Mercer, Eleanor assumed. He looked exactly like she'd imagined, hard and distant, and about as welcoming as the mountains themselves. Judith pulled the wagon to a stop. Mr. Mercer. Mrs. Kern. His voice was low, rough with disuse. Didn't expect you back so soon. I move fast when I need to. Judith climbed down, gesturing for Eleanor to follow. This is Eleanor Graves. Eleanor, Caleb Mercer. Eleanor met his eyes. They were gray, like winter sky, and about as warm. He looked her up and down. Not lecherous, just assessing. The way you'd evaluate livestock at auction. You understand the terms? He asked. Room, board, 30 a month. Cook, clean, mind the girls. Don't run off. Eleanor kept her voice level. Seems straightforward enough. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, that she didn't simper or apologize for existing. The work's hard. I've worked hard before. The girls are difficult. I've met difficult before, too. They stared at each other for a long moment. Eleanor refused to look away first. She'd been looked through, looked past, and looked down on for months now. She was done making herself smaller to fit other people's comfort. Finally, Caleb nodded. Your trunk? In the wagon. He grabbed it like it weighed nothing, which was impressive considering Eleanor had packed it full enough that she'd barely been able to lift it herself. I'll show you your room. Mrs. Kern, you staying for supper? Can't. Need to get back before dark. Judith touched Eleanor's shoulder briefly. Good luck, Mrs. Graves. You'll need it. Then she was gone, the wagon rattling back down the mountain road, leaving Eleanor alone with a silent man and two girls she hadn't even met yet. This way, Caleb said, and headed into the house. Eleanor followed, her heart pounding. The interior was dim and sparse. Rough furniture, bare walls, no curtains on the windows. It smelled like dust and loneliness and old coffee. A staircase led to the second floor. Your room's up here, Caleb said, already climbing. Girls are in the other bedrooms. I sleep downstairs. He pushed open a door at the end of the hall. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the valley. Eleanor could see for miles from here. Mountains upon mountains, endless and indifferent. Caleb set her trunk down with a heavy thud. Supper's at 6. Girls eat whatever you make, no complaints allowed. Breakfast at dawn. I'll be out working most days, back by evening. You need supplies. There's a list in the kitchen. Anything else? About 1,000 things, Eleanor thought. Where do the girls sleep? What do they like to eat? What are the rules? What am I really walking into here? But what she said was, no, I'll figure it out. Another nod. Good. He left without another word, his boots heavy on the stairs. Eleanor sat on the bed, which creaked under her weight, and let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The room was cold. Everything was cold. She could fix that probably. Find some blankets, get a fire going, make it livable. But first, she needed to meet the girls. She found them in the kitchen an hour later, or rather, she found one of them. The older girl, Rose presumably, sat at the table with a book open in front of her, though she wasn't reading. She was watching Eleanor with eyes that were sharp and calculating and full of barely disguised contempt. So you're the new one, Rose said. Not a question. A statement. Eleanor set her hands on her hips. And you're Rose. What gave it away? The attitude, mostly. Eleanor crossed to the stove, examining it. Cast iron, well used, but clean. Someone had been maintaining it. Where's your sister? Hiding. That's what she does when strangers show up. I'm not a stranger. I'm Eleanor. Rose snorted. You're stranger number 8. The last one lasted 2 weeks before she ran off crying. What did you do to her? Put a snake in her bed. Not a big one. She was dramatic about it. Eleanor turned to face the girl fully. Rose was all sharp angles and defensive posture, with her mother's dark hair and her father's stubborn jaw. 14 and furious at the world. Eleanor recognized that kind of anger. She'd worn it herself once upon a time. "Let me save us both some time," Eleanor said calmly. "I'm not here to replace your mother. I'm not here to make you like me. I'm here because I needed work and your father needed help. And that's the extent of it. You want to put snakes in my bed? Fine. I grew up on a farm. I've handled worse than snakes. You want to make my life miserable? Go ahead and try. But I'm not leaving." Rose's eyes narrowed. "They all say that. I'm not them. What makes you so special?" Eleanor smiled without humor. "I've got nowhere else to go, which means I'm too stubborn to quit and too desperate to care what you think of me. So do your worst, kid. I've already survived the worst thing I could imagine. Everything else is just details." For the first time, Rose looked uncertain, like she'd been expecting tears or pleading, and Eleanor's bluntness had thrown her off balance. "Supper's at 6, Rose said finally. "Don't burn it. Papa hates burned food." "Noted." The girl grabbed her book and disappeared upstairs, leaving Eleanor alone in the kitchen. She stood there for a moment, processing. Then she started opening cabinets, taking inventory. Flour, beans, salt pork, potatoes, coffee, dried apples. The basics, nothing fancy. She could work with this. She was elbow deep in bread dough an hour later when she felt eyes on her back. Eleanor didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge the presence, just kept kneading, working the dough with steady, practiced movements. After a full minute of silence, a small voice said, "You're big." Eleanor smiled slightly. "That I am." She glanced over her shoulder. The younger girl, Ivy, stood in the doorway like a ghost, all pale skin and enormous dark eyes. She was tiny for 8, delicate as spun glass, wearing a dress that had been mended so many times it was more patches than original fabric. "You must be Ivy," Eleanor said gently. "I'm Eleanor." Ivy didn't respond, just stared with those huge, wary eyes. "Your sister says you don't talk much." Still nothing. "That's all right. I talk enough for both of us." Eleanor shaped the dough into a loaf, set it aside to rise. "You like bread?" A tiny nod. "Good. This'll be ready by supper." Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron, studied the child. "You hungry now? I could make you something small." Ivy's expression didn't change, but she took one small step into the kitchen. Progress. Eleanor found some dried apples, put them in a bowl with a little sugar. "Here, these are good for nibbling." The girl crept forward like a wild animal approaching a trap, took the bowl with both hands, and retreated to the corner. She sat on the floor there, eating slowly, watching Eleanor work. They stayed like that for the rest of the afternoon, Eleanor cooking, Ivy watching. No words, no demands, just quiet companionship in a kitchen that probably hadn't seen much of either in 3 long years. When Caleb came in at 6, his boots muddy and his face exhausted, he stopped short at the sight of the table. Eleanor had made bread, stewed beans with salt pork, and fried potatoes. Nothing fancy, but hot and filling. Rose was already seated, looking suspicious. Ivy hovered near her corner, still clutching her empty bowl. "Wash up," Eleanor said simply. "Food's getting cold." Caleb blinked at her like she'd spoken in a foreign language. Then he looked at Ivy, really looked at her, and something in his expression cracked. "Ivy girl," he said quietly. "You been keeping Eleanor company?" The child nodded. "That's good. That's real good." He washed his hands at the pump, sat down heavily. "Smells good, Mrs. Graves." "It's just Eleanor." Another pause. "Eleanor, then." They ate in silence. Rose picked at her food, testing it for tampering. Caleb ate mechanically, like a man who'd forgotten what pleasure tasted like. Ivy took the smallest portions and made them last forever. But they ate. And that was something. After supper, Eleanor cleaned while Caleb disappeared back outside to check on the stock. Rose vanished upstairs. Ivy lingered, watching from her corner until Eleanor finally said, "You can help if you want, or you can just sit there. Either's fine by me." Ivy chose sitting, but she stayed close, and when Eleanor finished the dishes, the girl followed her upstairs like a shadow. "Good night, Ivy," Eleanor said at her bedroom door. Ivy stared at her for a long moment. Then, so quietly Eleanor almost missed it. "Night." It wasn't much, just one word from a child who hadn't spoken in 3 years. But Eleanor felt it like a victory anyway, small and fragile and precious. She closed her door, sat on the narrow bed, and let herself feel the weight of the day. The fear, the uncertainty, the bone-deep exhaustion of starting over in a place where nothing was familiar and nothing was safe. But she'd made it, one day down. Tomorrow, she'd do it again. Outside her window, the mountains loomed dark against the stars, and somewhere in the valley below, a coyote howled. Eleanor didn't sleep well that first night, but she slept, and for now, that was enough. The days fell into a rhythm. Eleanor woke before dawn, started the stove, made coffee strong enough to strip paint. Caleb would appear like a ghost, drink a cup standing up, and disappear into the pre-dawn darkness to tend the cattle. Rose would slouch downstairs eventually, radiating hostility. Ivy would materialize silently, watching everything with those enormous eyes. Breakfast, cleaning, mending, cooking. The work was endless and hard, just like Judith had promised. But Eleanor had been doing hard work her whole life. This wasn't so different from the farm where she'd grown up, or the years with Thomas when they'd tried to make a go of their own place. The difference was the silence. The Mercer house was so quiet it felt like a held breath. Nobody laughed. Nobody sang. Conversations happened in single syllables or not at all. It was like living with ghosts who hadn't realized they were dead yet. Rose tested her constantly. Salt in the sugar bowl. Mud tracked deliberately through the clean kitchen. Small cruelties designed to provoke a reaction. Eleanor ignored most of it, cleaned up the rest, and refused to rise to the bait. "Don't you ever get mad?" Rose demanded one afternoon, after Eleanor had silently mopped up the mess the girl had made, accidentally knocking over a bucket of wash water. "Sure," Eleanor said, "but getting mad at you would be like getting mad at a storm. You're going to blow however you're going to blow. I'm just here to clean up after." Rose's face flushed. "I'm not a storm. Then stop acting like one." The girl stomped off, furious. But the next day, the accidents stopped. Small victories. Ivy was different. The child drifted through the house like smoke, never making a sound, never asking for anything. But she was always there, hovering on the edges, watching. Eleanor started leaving little things for her to find. A flower picked on the walk to the chicken coop, a piece of ribbon, a particularly smooth stone. Ivy never said anything, but the gifts would disappear, tucked away somewhere private. And slowly, very slowly, the girl started to creep closer. By the end of the second week, Ivy was helping with small tasks, peeling potatoes, folding laundry, setting the table. Still silent, but present, participating. Caleb noticed. Eleanor could see it in the way he watched his younger daughter, something desperate and grateful flickering across his stone face before he locked it away again. "She's doing better," he said one evening, the most words he'd strung together since Eleanor had arrived. "She's a good kid." "She is." A pause. "Thank you." Eleanor shrugged. "I'm just doing my job." "The others—" He stopped, shook his head. "The others tried to fix her. You're just letting her be." It was the closest thing to approval Eleanor had gotten from him, and she felt it warm something in her chest that she hadn't realized was cold. But that warmth vanished 2 days later when she found Rose in the barn, setting a trap. Eleanor had gone out to collect eggs and noticed the older girl climbing the ladder to the hayloft with a coil of rope and a look of grim determination. She followed quietly, watching from below as Rose rigged something up in the shadows. "What are you doing?" Eleanor called up. Rose jumped, nearly dropping the rope. "None of your business." "It's my business if you're planning to hurt yourself." "I'm not." Rose descended the ladder, her face flushed. It doesn't matter." But Eleanor had seen the setup, the loose board, the tripwire, the carefully calculated spot where someone climbing up would put their weight. "That's for me," she said quietly. Not a question. Rose's jaw set. "Maybe. When you send me to the hospital with a broken leg, who's going to cook? Who's going to take care of Ivy?" Eleanor kept her voice level, calm. "You think your father's going to hire someone new after that? You think another woman's going to want to work here after hearing how the last one got hurt? You said you weren't leaving." "I'm not. But that doesn't mean I'm invincible." Eleanor met the girl's eyes. "What do you want, Rose? Really want?" Because if it's to drive me away, there are easier methods than trying to kill me. I don't want to kill you, Rose said, but her voice wavered. I just want... She stopped, swallowed hard, and for the first time since Eleanor had met her, the anger cracked and something raw showed through underneath. I just want it to stop hurting, Rose whispered. Eleanor's heart broke a little. She knew that feeling, the grief that turned to rage because rage was easier to carry than sorrow, the desperate need to push people away before they could leave on their own. I know, Eleanor said softly, but breaking my leg isn't going to make it hurt less. Rose's eyes filled with tears. She turned away fast, swiping at her face. I'll take it down. Leave it, Eleanor said. I'll do it. You go on back to the house. The girl fled without another word. Eleanor climbed the ladder carefully, her weight making the old wood creak. The hayloft was a disaster. Rotting boards, weak spots everywhere, hay bales stacked haphazardly. She could see why Rose had chosen this place. One wrong step and... She was reaching for the tripwire when she heard the sound, a soft whimper coming from the far corner. Ivy? Eleanor moved toward the sound, testing each board before putting her full weight on it. The child was wedged in the corner behind a hay bale, her face white with terror, tears streaming down her cheeks. Honey, what are you doing up here? Ivy's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She just pointed upward with a shaking hand. Eleanor followed her gaze. A cat. A skinny orange tabby sat on one of the highest beams, meowing pitifully. You came up here for the cat? A tiny nod. And then you got scared? Another nod. Eleanor's stomach dropped. The loft was a death trap, and this child had climbed up here alone trying to rescue a cat. She could have fallen, could have gone through a weak board, could have... All right, Eleanor said, forcing her voice to stay calm. We're going to get you down, nice and slow. But when Ivy tried to stand, her whole body started shaking. The girl was terrified, frozen, paralyzed by fear. Eleanor looked at the ladder, looked at the child, looked at her own size and the questionable boards beneath her feet. This was a bad idea. This was a terrible idea. She held out her hand anyway. Come here, sweet pea. I've got you. Ivy's eyes went wide. She shook her head frantically. I know I'm big, Eleanor said gently. I know you think I'm too heavy for these boards. And you might be right. But I'm not leaving you up here alone and you can't get down by yourself. So we're doing this together. She took a step forward. The board beneath her groaned but held. Another step, another groan. Ivy whimpered. It's all right, Eleanor murmured, moving closer. Just a little further. That's it. Come on, baby. Take my hand. The child reached out with trembling fingers. Their hands met. Eleanor pulled Ivy close, lifting the girl onto her hip. The boards screamed under their combined weight. Eleanor could feel them starting to give, starting to crack. Hold on tight, she said, and started moving toward the ladder. 5 steps. That's all it was. 5 steps across boards that felt like they were disintegrating beneath her feet. Eleanor moved as quickly as she dared, her heart hammering, Ivy's small body pressed against her chest. 3 steps from the ladder, the board cracked clean through. Eleanor lunged forward, grabbing the ladder with one hand while clutching Ivy with the other. Her legs dangled through the broken board, splinters tearing at her skirt, her body swinging wildly. Ivy screamed, an actual sound, piercing and terrified. I've got you, Eleanor gasped. I've got you. I've got you. She hauled them both onto the ladder, her arms screaming with the effort. Down, down, down! Eleanor descended as fast as she could with one arm wrapped around Ivy, her breath coming in ragged gasps. They hit solid ground and Eleanor collapsed, still holding the child. Her whole body was shaking, her skirt was torn, her hands were bleeding from splinters. But Ivy was safe. The girl burrowed into Eleanor's chest, sobbing now, making sounds that were almost words but not quite. Shh, Eleanor whispered, stroking her hair. You're okay. You're safe. I've got you. Don't let go, Ivy whimpered against her shoulder. Please don't let go. Never, Eleanor promised. I'm not letting go. That's how Caleb found them 10 minutes later. Eleanor sitting in the barn dirt, her dress ruined, her hands bloody, Ivy wrapped around her like a barnacle and refusing to release her grip. What happened? His voice was sharp with fear. Cat in the loft, Eleanor said tiredly. Ivy went after it, got scared. I got her down. Caleb stared at the broken board visible through the loft opening, at the precarious ladder, at Eleanor's size and the impossible physics of what she'd just done. You could have died, he said quietly. Wasn't planning on it. The boards held long enough. Eleanor shifted Ivy slightly, wincing. Her hip was going to be one massive bruise tomorrow. Your daughter needed help, so I helped. Caleb knelt beside them, reaching for Ivy. Come here, Ivy girl. Let Eleanor breathe. But Ivy clung tighter, shaking her head. Please, she whispered. Don't make me let go. Caleb froze. His face went white. Ivy, he breathed. You're talking. The girl nodded against Eleanor's shoulder. Scared, she whispered. Was so scared. I know, baby, I know. Caleb's voice cracked. But you're safe now. Eleanor saved you. Ivy finally pulled back enough to look at Eleanor's face. Thank you, she said clearly. 2 words. The first clear words this child had spoken in 3 years, and she'd used them for Eleanor. Something broke open in Eleanor's chest. Something tight and painful that she'd been carrying since Thomas died, since Millerville threw her away, since she'd started believing she was too big and too broken to matter to anyone. You're welcome, Sweet Pea, she managed. Rose appeared in the barn doorway, her face white. She'd heard Ivy scream. She'd come running. She spoke, Rose said, her voice shaking. Ivy spoke. She did, Eleanor confirmed. Rose's eyes filled with tears. She looked at the broken loft, at Eleanor's torn dress and bloody hands, at her little sister clinging to this big stranger like a lifeline. The trap, Rose whispered. If you'd stepped on it, but I didn't. You could have died getting Ivy down. But I didn't. Eleanor met the girl's eyes. And neither did your sister. That's what matters. Rose started crying, really crying, the kind of deep, wrenching sobs that come from years of holding everything in. She stumbled forward and collapsed next to them, pressing her face against Eleanor's other shoulder. I'm sorry, she choked out. I'm so sorry. I was so mean and you saved her anyway, and I'm sorry. Oh. Hush, Eleanor said, wrapping her free arm around Rose. It's all right. You're all right. Caleb stood there watching his daughters, one who'd finally spoken, one who'd finally broken, both clinging to the woman he'd hired out of desperation. His face did something complicated, something that looked like grief and relief and gratitude all tangled together. We should get you inside, he said roughly. Get those hands cleaned up. Eleanor nodded, but neither girl would let her move. So Caleb helped them all stand as a unit, this strange bundle of women and grief and second chances, and walked them slowly back to the house as the sun set over the Iron Ridge Mountains. That night, after her hands were bandaged and the girls were finally asleep, Eleanor sat in her small room and let herself shake. Let herself feel the terror of those moments in the loft when she'd thought the boards would give way completely. Let herself acknowledge how close they'd both come to dying. Then she opened her trunk and pulled out Thomas's Bible. She hadn't looked at it since the funeral, couldn't bear to. But tonight, she needed something, comfort maybe, or just a reminder that she'd survived before and would again. A piece of paper fell out from between the pages. Eleanor picked it up, recognizing Thomas's handwriting immediately. Ellie, it read, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry for that. Sorry for the debts, sorry for leaving you alone, sorry for all of it. But I'm not sorry about the pouch. That's your future in there, love. Your way out when you need it most. Don't waste it. Don't spend it on my mistakes. Save it for when you find a place worth fighting for. I love you. Always did. Even when I was too sick and stupid to show it. T. Eleanor pressed the letter to her chest, tears finally coming. All these months, she'd thought Thomas had left her with nothing but debts and heartbreak. But he'd left her a future. A choice. She pulled out the leather pouch, held it in her hands. Still unopened. Still a promise waiting to be kept. A place worth fighting for. Eleanor looked around her small room, listened to the quiet house, thought about 2 girls who'd finally started to heal, and a man who'd almost remembered how to hope. Maybe, she thought, maybe this could be that place. But not yet. Not today. She had time. Eleanor tucked the pouch back into the trunk, climbed into bed, and fell asleep to the sound of wind in the pines and the knowledge that tomorrow she'd wake up and do it all again. Because that's what you did when you found something worth keeping. You stayed. Winter came to Iron Ridge like a fist. Eleanor woke one November morning to find frost coating the inside of her bedroom window and her breath visible in the air. She dressed quickly, layering every piece of clothing she owned, and headed downstairs to find Caleb already stoking the fire. "Storm's coming," he said without preamble. "Big one. We need to get the cattle down from the high pasture before it hits." Eleanor looked out the window. The sky was gray as iron, and the wind had that peculiar stillness that meant trouble. "How long do we have?" "Day, maybe 2 if we're lucky." He pulled on his coat, his face grim. "I'll take Rose with me. She knows the trails. You keep Ivy inside. Stock the woodpile. Fill every container we have with water from the pump. If the well freezes—" "I know what to do," Eleanor interrupted gently. "I grew up in winters like this." Caleb paused, looked at her properly for the first time in days. "Right. I forget sometimes. That I had a life before here? That you're competent." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. "Most women would be panicking right now." "I'm not most women." "No," he said quietly. "You're not." He left before Eleanor could figure out what that meant, Rose trailing behind him like a gangly shadow. The girl had changed in the weeks since the barn incident, not transformed exactly. She still had edges sharp enough to cut, but the deliberate cruelty had stopped, replaced by something more complicated. Grief, maybe. Or the beginning of trust. Eleanor watched them disappear into the gray morning, then turned to find Ivy standing at the bottom of the stairs in her nightgown, shivering. "Come here, sweet pea. Let's get you warm." The child had been speaking more in the past few weeks, though never very much. Her words came out carefully, like she was testing each one before releasing it into the world. But she'd started following Eleanor everywhere, a small, silent shadow that Eleanor had grown fond of in a way that surprised her. "Papa and Rose left," Ivy observed. "They'll be back. Storm's coming, so they've got to move the cattle." Eleanor wrapped a blanket around the girl's shoulders. "How about you help me get ready? We've got a lot to do." They spent the morning working side by side. Eleanor hauled wood while Ivy stacked it by the stove. They filled buckets and barrels with water, checked the food stores, brought extra hay into the barn for the horses. By noon, Eleanor's back ached and her hands were raw, but the house was as prepared as it could be. "Good work," she told Ivy, who beamed at the praise. The snow started falling around 2 in the afternoon, not gentle flakes, but hard pellets driven sideways by wind that howled like something alive and angry. Eleanor watched it through the window, her stomach tight with worry. Caleb and Rose had been gone for hours. "They'll be fine," she said out loud, trying to convince herself as much as Ivy. "Your father knows these mountains." But the storm got worse and worse. By evening, Eleanor couldn't see the barn through the wall of white. The wind screamed around the house, rattling windows and finding every crack in the walls. The temperature dropped so fast that frost formed on the inside walls despite the fire. Ivy pressed close to Eleanor on the couch, wrapped in every blanket they owned. "When are they coming back?" "Soon," Eleanor lied. 7 o'clock came and went. 8. 9. Eleanor made soup and forced herself to eat, made Ivy eat too, though the child only picked at her bowl. The wind got louder, the cold got deeper, and still no sign of Caleb or Rose. At 10 o'clock, Eleanor heard something over the wind. A shout, maybe, or just her imagination playing tricks. Then it came again. Definitely a shout. Eleanor grabbed her coat. "Stay here, Ivy. Keep the fire going." "Don't go out there." The girl's voice rose, panicked. "You'll get lost." "I'm just going to the barn. I'll tie a rope from the porch so I can find my way back." Eleanor was already wrapping a scarf around her face, pulling on every layer she had. "Your father might need help." She tied one end of the rope to the porch railing and stepped into the storm. The cold hit her like a physical blow. The wind tore at her clothes, drove snow into her eyes and mouth, stole the breath from her lungs. Eleanor kept one hand on the rope and pushed forward, each step a battle against the gale. The barn loomed out of the white. Eleanor stumbled inside and found Caleb trying to unsaddle his horse with hands that were shaking so badly he couldn't work the buckles. Rose sat huddled in the corner, her lips blue, her whole body trembling. "Let me," Eleanor said, pushing Caleb's frozen fingers aside. She got the saddle off, threw a blanket over the horse, then turned to Rose. "Can you walk?" The girl nodded, but when she tried to stand, her legs buckled. "Caleb, can you carry her?" "I've got her." His voice was rough, slurred with cold. Not good. That meant hypothermia was setting in. Eleanor grabbed the rope and led them back through the storm, step by painful step. The house appeared like a miracle, warm light glowing through the windows. Ivy had the door open before they reached it, her face white with fear. "Help me get their coats off," Eleanor ordered, already stripping Rose out of her frozen layers. The girls' clothes were soaked through, ice crystals clinging to the fabric. Caleb wasn't much better. "We got caught," he managed through chattering teeth. "Cattle scattered. Had to chase them down. Lost the trail on the way back." "Stop talking. Save your energy." Eleanor worked quickly, efficiently, the way her mother had taught her during the hard winters of her childhood. Get the wet clothes off. Get them dry. Get them warm. "Ivy, bring more blankets. All of them." They wrapped Rose first, the girl too cold to even protest. Then Caleb. Eleanor built up the fire until it roared, made hot coffee laced with honey, forced them both to drink even when they said they couldn't. "You're going to drink it or I'm going to pour it down your throat," Eleanor said flatly. "Your choice." Caleb drank. It took hours for the shaking to stop. Rose fell asleep first, curled up on the couch like a child. Caleb stayed awake longer, sitting close to the fire with a blanket around his shoulders and his hands wrapped around a coffee cup. "We almost didn't make it back," he said quietly. "Another hour out there." "But you did make it back, because you came out in the storm, because you knew we'd need help." He looked at her, his gray eyes steady for once instead of distant. "You could have stayed inside, could have kept yourself and Ivy safe and let us fend for ourselves." "That's not how this works," Eleanor said. "How what works?" "Family. You don't abandon people when things get hard. You suit up and walk into the storm if that's what it takes." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "Is that what we are?" he asked finally. "Family?" Eleanor met his eyes. She thought about the past 2 months, the meals cooked and shared, the small victories and quiet moments, the way Ivy had started sleeping through the night without nightmares, the way Rose had stopped looking at Eleanor like an enemy and started looking at her like something else, something softer. "I don't know what else you'd call it," she said. Something shifted in Caleb's expression, something that looked almost like hope. "I hired you to cook and clean." "I know. This is more than that." "I know that too." "I can't pay you extra. The ranch barely breaks even most years." Eleanor shook her head. "I'm not asking for more money, Caleb. I'm just saying, this place feels different now, better. And I think maybe that's because we stopped pretending we're just employer and employee and started acting like people who give a damn about each other." He studied her face like he was seeing her for the first time. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone temporary. Someone who'd do the job and leave when something better came along." He set down his coffee cup. "Someone who didn't matter." "And now?" "Now I'm sitting here realizing that if you left, this house would go back to being what it was before. Empty. Just people existing in the same space, not really living." Caleb's voice dropped. "I don't want to go back to that." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Then don't." They sat in silence after that, listening to the storm rage outside and the fire crackle inside. Rose and Ivy slept on, and Eleanor felt something settle in her chest that she hadn't felt since Thomas died. Purpose. Belonging. Home. The storm lasted 3 days. They were trapped inside with dwindling food supplies, and nothing to do except tell stories and play cards, and learn how to be comfortable in each other's company. Rose taught Ivy a complicated hand-clapping game. Caleb fixed a broken chair leg that Eleanor had been meaning to get to. Eleanor darned socks and hummed old songs her mother used to sing. On the second day, when cabin fever was setting in hard, Rose said suddenly, "Tell us about your husband." Eleanor's hand stilled on the socks she was mending. "What do you want to know?" "What was he like? Was he nice? Did you love him?" "Rose," Caleb said warningly, but Eleanor held up a hand. "It's all right." She set down her mending, gathered her thoughts. "Thomas was complicated." He was kind when he wanted to be, distant when he didn't. He had big dreams that never quite worked out, and he wasn't very good with money. We were happy sometimes. Other times we were just two people trying to make a life work when the world kept knocking us down. Did he love you? Ivy asked softly. In his way, not the way the romance novels talk about, all grand gestures and poetry, but he stayed. Even when things got hard, he stayed. Eleanor paused. Until the fever took him, anyway. That wasn't his choice. Do you miss him? Rose's voice was careful, like she was testing dangerous ground. Eleanor thought about it honestly. I miss having a partner, someone to share the work with, to make decisions with. I miss not being alone. She looked at the girls. But I don't miss the life we had. The struggling, the debts, the way the whole town looked at us like we were failures. I don't miss being invisible. You're not invisible here, Ivy said. No, Eleanor agreed, feeling warmth spread through her chest. I'm not. Rose picked at a loose thread on her skirt. Mama was different from you. I know. She was small, delicate. She used to sing all the time, even when there was nothing to sing about. Papa would look at her like she was made of glass that might break if he touched her wrong. Eleanor glanced at Caleb, who'd gone very still. She sounds lovely, Eleanor said carefully. She was. Rose's eyes filled with tears. But she wasn't strong. Not like you. When things got hard, she'd cry and Papa would fix it. She never had to fix things herself. Rose, Caleb started, but his daughter shook her head. I'm not saying I didn't love her, I did. I loved her so much it felt like dying when she left. Rose wiped her face roughly. But you're different. You don't wait for someone to save you. You just do what needs doing. And I think maybe that's what we needed all along. Eleanor didn't know what to say to that. The comparison felt unfair to a woman who'd died trying to bring new life into the world. But she understood what Rose was really saying. Thank you for being strong enough to stay. Your mother loved you, Eleanor said gently. Whatever else was true, that was true. And she'd be proud of who you're becoming. Rose broke then, really broke, and Eleanor pulled her close while the girl sobbed against her shoulder. Ivy climbed into Eleanor's lap, adding her own tears to the mix. And Caleb sat across from them with his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. They cried for a dead woman none of them had been allowed to properly mourn. They cried for 3 years of silence and anger and grief that had nowhere to go. They cried until there were no tears left, until the storm outside quieted and the storm inside finally began to ease. When it was over, Ivy fell asleep in Eleanor's lap. Rose dozed on her shoulder, and Caleb looked at Eleanor across the lamplight with something raw and grateful in his eyes. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For letting them grieve. For not being jealous of her. Eleanor stroked Ivy's hair gently. I'm not here to replace her, Caleb. I'm just here to help you all keep living. You're doing more than that. He stood, moved closer, knelt beside the couch where Eleanor sat buried in children. You're teaching us how. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her hand. Just that. A simple touch that meant everything and nothing. Eleanor's breath caught. She couldn't remember the last time someone had touched her with tenderness instead of necessity. Couldn't remember the last time a man had looked at her like she was worth looking at. Caleb, she whispered, I know what I said when I hired you, about this being just work, nothing more. His thumb traced across her knuckles. I was lying to myself. You were protecting yourself. Maybe, but I don't think I need protection from you. He smiled slightly. You're too busy keeping the rest of us alive to bother breaking my heart. Eleanor wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. That's a low bar for romance. Good thing I'm not trying to romance you. No? No, I'm just trying to be honest. Caleb squeezed her hand once, then let go and stood. I should let you sleep. You've been running yourself ragged taking care of all of us. He was right. Eleanor was exhausted down to her bones. But she was also more content than she'd been in years. Caleb, she called as he headed toward his room, when the storm clears, we should talk. Really talk. About what this is. He paused in the doorway, looked back at her. What do you think it is? I don't know yet, but I think it might be important. Yeah, he said softly. I think so too. The storm broke on the fourth day, revealing a world transformed. Snow covered everything 3 feet deep, turning the ranch into something from a fairy tale. The sky was brilliant blue, the air so cold it hurt to breathe, and the silence was absolute. They dug themselves out slowly. Caleb and Rose cleared paths to the barn, while Eleanor and Ivy worked on the house. It took most of the day to restore some semblance of normalcy. That evening, after the girls were in bed, Caleb and Eleanor sat at the kitchen table with coffee that had been reheated so many times it tasted like tar. "I need to tell you something," Caleb said abruptly. "About the ranch." Eleanor set down her cup. "All right, we're in trouble. Financial trouble. Have been for years, but it's getting worse." He pulled out a ledger, flipped it open to show columns of numbers that told a grim story. "The bank owns more of this place than I do. I've got a note coming due in the spring, and I don't have a way to pay it." Eleanor studied the numbers. They were bad. Really bad. "How much?" $3,000. She whistled low. That was a fortune. "What happens if you can't pay?" "They take the ranch, take everything. The girls and I would have to leave, find work somewhere else." Caleb's jaw tightened. Rose would have to quit school. Ivy would lose the only home she's ever known. And I'd spend the rest of my life working someone else's land instead of my own. There has to be a way. If there is, I haven't found it. I've been racking my brain for months. Selling cattle won't cover it. Taking extra work won't do it. I'm out of options. Eleanor thought about the leather pouch in her trunk, the gold coins Thomas had saved, the future he'd wanted her to have. Save it for when you find a place worth fighting for. Was this that place? Was this ragtag family of broken people worth spending her entire fortune on? Eleanor looked at Caleb's tired face, thought about Rose's slow transformation from angry child to someone who could cry and laugh again. Thought about Ivy's voice, that precious gift of words that had been 3 years in the coming. Yes, she realized, this was exactly the place worth fighting for. But $3,000! Even with the gold, she didn't know if she had that much. And if she gave it all to save the ranch, she'd be right back where she started, penniless and dependent on the charity of others. "I might have some money," she said slowly. "I don't know how much. My husband left me something, but I haven't counted it." Caleb's eyes widened. "Eleanor, no! I wasn't telling you this to ask for money. I was telling you because if we lose the ranch in the spring, I wanted you to have time to find another position somewhere else. You're trying to give me an out. I'm trying to be fair. You didn't sign up for this. You signed up to cook and clean, not to throw your savings into a failing ranch." Eleanor stood, went to the stairs. "Wait here." She retrieved the leather pouch from her trunk, brought it back to the kitchen, and dumped the contents onto the table. Gold coins spilled out in a glittering cascade. More than Eleanor had imagined. More than Thomas had any right to save while they were drowning in debt. "Where did he get this?" she breathed. There was another folded paper tucked in the bottom of the pouch. Eleanor opened it with shaking hands. This is from before we met. I had another life, made some choices I'm not proud of. Won this in a card game off a man who probably stole it himself. Been carrying the guilt ever since. But it's clean money now, or as clean as anything gets. Use it well. T. Eleanor laughed, a sound caught between joy and sorrow. Trust Thomas to leave her a fortune with a confession attached. "How much is there?" Caleb asked quietly. They counted together. $1,800 in gold. Not enough, not nearly enough. Eleanor's heart sank. "I'm sorry. It's more than I had yesterday," Caleb interrupted. "It's a fighting chance. But it's still $1,200 short. Then we'll find the rest. Sell more cattle. I'll take work in town over the winter. We'll scrimp and save and—" He stopped, shook his head. "Eleanor, I can't take this from you. This is your security. Your way out if things go bad. Things are already bad, and the only way out I want is through." Eleanor met his eyes. "I'm not giving you this money because I'm trying to buy a place here. I'm giving it to you because this is already my place. These girls are already my girls. This ranch is already my home, and I'll be damned if I let some bank take it without a fight." Caleb stared at her. Then he did something that shocked them both. He kissed her. Not gently, not tentatively, but with a hunger that spoke of 3 years of loneliness and grief, of nights spent cold and mornings waking up alone. of wanting something he'd convinced himself he could never have again. Eleanor kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. She'd forgotten what this felt like. The heat, the need, the simple human connection of being wanted. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "I didn't mean to do that," he said. "Liar." He laughed, the sound rusty but real. "All right, I've wanted to do that for weeks, maybe longer, but I didn't think I had the right. Because I work for you? Because you deserve better than a broke rancher with a dying spread and 2 traumatized children." Eleanor cupped his face in her hands, made him look at her. "What I deserve is someone who sees me, really sees me. Not just the parts that are useful, but all of it. The good, the bad, the too big, and too loud, and too much of me." Her voice dropped. "You see me, Caleb. You've seen me from the start. That's worth more than all the money in the world." His eyes were bright with emotion. "I do see you. You're the strongest person I've ever met, the kindest, the most—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I'm falling in love with you, Eleanor. Probably already have fallen, and it terrifies me." Her heart stuttered. "Why?" "Because what if you leave? What if this doesn't work? What if I lose you the way I lost?" Eleanor pressed her fingers to his lips, stopping the spiral. "I'm not her. I'm not delicate. I'm not going anywhere. And I don't break easy." She smiled slightly. "You're stuck with me, Caleb Mercer. Better get used to it." He pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. "I want this to work. Want us to work. Then we'll make it work. We'll save the ranch, raise the girls, and figure out the rest as we go." They held each other in the quiet kitchen while the fire burned low and the night deepened outside. 2 damaged people who'd found something neither of them had been looking for. Hope. The next morning, Eleanor woke to find Rose and Ivy in her doorway, watching her with identical expressions of curiosity. "Papa's smiling," Rose announced, like actually smiling. "What did you do to him?" Eleanor sat up, trying to look innocent. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "He's whistling," Ivy added. "Papa never whistles." "Maybe he's just happy the storm is over." "Or maybe," Rose said with a knowing look far too mature for 14, "he's happy because of you." Eleanor's face heated. "That's presumptuous." "Is it?" Rose came into the room, sat on the edge of the bed. "Because Ivy and I were talking, and we think maybe you and Papa should get married." Eleanor choked on air. "What? You heard me. You already act married. You cook his meals, mend his clothes, take care of his kids. Might as well make it official." "Rose, that's not how it works. Marriage isn't just about convenience." "I know that. But it's also not just about romance, right? It's about partnership, about finding someone who makes life less hard." The girl's expression turned serious. "You make Papa less sad. You make this house feel like a home again. And you make Ivy and me feel like we matter. That's what marriage should be." Ivy climbed onto the bed, nestled against Eleanor's side. "We want you to stay forever," she said simply. "Getting married means you can't leave." Eleanor's throat closed up. These children. These impossible, wonderful children who'd wormed their way into her heart without permission. "Marriage doesn't work like that, Sweet Pea. People can leave even when they're married." "But you wouldn't," Ivy said with absolute certainty. "You're not the leaving kind." Rose nodded. "You're the staying kind. Like Mama was supposed to be, but couldn't. You stay even when things are hard, even when we're awful, even when the barn's falling down and there's a storm and everything's terrible. You stay." Eleanor pulled both girls close, overwhelmed. "I don't need a ring to make that promise. I'm staying regardless." "But wouldn't it be nice," Rose pressed, "to have it official? To be a real family instead of just whatever this is?" Before Eleanor could answer, Caleb appeared in the doorway. "Girls, leave Eleanor alone. She doesn't need you harassing her before breakfast." "We're not harassing," Rose protested. "We're suggesting." "Suggesting what?" "That you marry Eleanor." Caleb's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Shock. Embarrassment. Something that might have been hope. "Rose, that's not—" "Why not?" Rose stood, hands on her hips. "You love her. She loves you. We love her. What's the problem?" The problem is that people don't get married because children tell them to. Then why do they get married? Because, Caleb floundered, looked at Eleanor helplessly. Because they choose each other. Because they want to build a life together. Because, he trailed off. Because they love each other and want to make it official, Rose finished triumphantly. Which is exactly what I said. Eleanor burst out laughing. She couldn't help it. The whole situation was absurd. What's funny? Ivy asked. All of it. Us, this conversation. The fact that I've been here less than 3 months and we're already talking about marriage. Is that too fast? Caleb asked quietly. Eleanor looked at him. Really looked. At the man who'd hired her out of desperation and somehow become essential. At the girls who'd needed her and given her purpose again. At this makeshift family that had formed in the broken places. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe. Probably. But then again, what's time got to do with it? I knew I wanted to stay after the first week, knew this mattered after the barn incident, knew I was falling for all of you somewhere between the storm and last night. Caleb crossed the room, knelt beside the bed, took her hand. I don't have a ring, don't have much of anything really, except this failing ranch and 2 meddling daughters. Hey, Rose protested, but I have this. He pressed her hand to his chest over his heart. And it's yours if you want it. Has been for a while now, whether I wanted to admit it or not. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard. It's the only one I've got. Then I guess I'll have to take it. She smiled through the tears. Yes, you impossible man. I'll marry you. I'll stay. I'll fight for this ranch and these girls and whatever future we can scrape together, He kissed her quiet, gentle this time, sweet instead of desperate. The girls cheered, and Eleanor felt something settle in her soul that had been restless since Thomas died. She was home. They married 2 weeks later in the kitchen with the circuit judge who happened through Iron Ridge on his winter rounds. Eleanor wore her best dress, the dark blue one with only 2 patches, and Caleb put on the suit he'd been married in before, the one that smelled like mothballs and regret. Rose and Ivy stood witness, solemn as church mice, until Ivy started giggling halfway through the vows and couldn't stop. Do you find something amusing about matrimony, young lady? The judge asked, but he was smiling. Eleanor's crying, Ivy said, pointing, but she's happy. I didn't know people cried when they were happy. Eleanor wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Sometimes that's the only way the happy can get out. The judge pronounced them married. Caleb kissed her quick and awkward in front of the girls, and that was it. Eleanor Graves became Eleanor Mercer in the time it took to sign a piece of paper and make promises she intended to keep. They celebrated with the cake Eleanor had made that morning, lopsided and overly sweet, and coffee that was somehow both too strong and too weak. Rose gave them a drawing she'd made of the 4 of them standing in front of the house. Ivy presented Eleanor with a carefully folded paper flower, and Caleb handed Eleanor a thin gold band that had belonged to his grandmother. It's not much, he said, sliding it onto her finger, but it's been in the family since before the war. Eleanor looked at the simple ring, worn smooth by generations of wear. It's perfect. That night, after the girls were asleep, Eleanor and Caleb sat together on the porch, despite the cold, wrapped in blankets and watching the stars wheel overhead. You nervous? Caleb asked. About what? All of it. Being married to me. Taking on this mess of a family. The ranch falling apart around our ears. Eleanor considered. No. Terrified would be more accurate. He laughed softly. At least you're honest. I figure we've got enough lies between us already without adding more. She turned to look at him. This is real now. Legal. I can't just walk away if it gets hard. You could. Women leave marriages all the time. Not me. I made a promise. So did I. Twice now. His voice went quiet. I failed the first time. You didn't fail. She died. That's different. I should have gotten the doctor sooner. Should have known something was wrong. Should have... Eleanor put her hand over his mouth. Stop. You can't carry that forever, Caleb. It'll break you. He pulled her hand away but kept holding it. How do you let go of something like that? You don't. You just learn to carry it different. Make room for new things alongside the old grief. Eleanor squeezed his fingers. That's what we're doing, isn't it? Making room. Yeah, he said. I guess we are. They sat in silence after that, comfortable and solid, until the cold drove them inside to a marriage bed neither of them quite knew what to do with. The trouble came 3 weeks later on a bitter January morning when a man rode up the mountain in a coat too fine for ranch work and a horse too expensive for these parts. Eleanor saw him first from the kitchen window. "We've got company." Caleb looked up from the ledger he'd been studying, his face already tense. "What kind of company?" "Rich kind." Rose appeared at the top of the stairs. "Is it him? Is it Vernon Hale?" The name meant nothing to Eleanor, but the way Rose said it, like spitting poison, told her everything she needed to know. "Who's Vernon Hale?" Eleanor asked. "Trouble," Caleb said, already moving toward the door. "Stay inside, all of you." But Eleanor followed him onto the porch anyway, Rose right behind her. They watched the rider approach, a tall man in his 50s with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Caleb Mercer," the man called out, swinging down from his horse like he owned the place. "Been a while." "Not long enough, Hale." Vernon Hale's smile widened. "Now, is that any way to greet a neighbor? You're not a neighbor, you're a vulture, and you're trespassing. Am I?" Hale pulled out a folded document from his coat. "Because according to this survey, that creek running through your property actually sits on land I own. Has for years, apparently. Nobody bothered to check the boundaries until now." Caleb's face went white. "That creek's been ours since my grandfather's time." See, that's where it gets interesting. Your grandfather filed his claim based on faulty maps. I had proper surveyors come through last month. County agrees with me." Hale tapped the document. "Which means you've been using my water for 30 years without permission. That's theft, Caleb." "That's horseshit." "Watch your language. There are ladies present." Hale's eyes slid over Eleanor, dismissive and cold. "Though I see you've acquired new ones since Mary passed. Moving on quick, weren't you?" Caleb took a step forward, fists clenched, but Eleanor put a hand on his arm. "What do you want?" she asked Hale directly. "Smart question from the new Mrs. Mercer." Hale folded the document away. "I want this property. The water rights alone are worth a fortune, and the land would connect my holdings all the way to the ridge. I'm prepared to make a fair offer." "We're not selling," Caleb said flatly. "Even with that banknote coming due? Even knowing you'll lose everything anyway when spring comes?" Hale shook his head. "Take my offer, Caleb. It's generous. More than you'll get at auction." "Get off my land!" "It's not your land much longer. One way or another, I'm getting this property." Hale swung back onto his horse, looked down at them with something ugly in his expression. "The easy way is you sell to me. The hard way is I file a complaint with the county about those water rights and take you to court. Either way, you lose. Choose wisely." He rode off without waiting for an answer, leaving them standing on the porch in the cold. Rose was shaking. "He can't take the ranch." "He can't." "He can try," Caleb said grimly, "and he's got the money to make it happen." Eleanor's mind was already working through possibilities. "Can he really claim the creek?" "I don't know, maybe. The original surveys were rough at best. If he's got lawyers who can prove the boundaries are wrong." Caleb ran a hand through his hair. "We can't afford to fight him in court. Can't even afford a lawyer to look at his documents." "Then we don't fight in court. We fight somewhere else." "Where?" Eleanor looked at her husband, at his defeated shoulders and tired eyes. "In town. In public. We make sure everyone knows what he's trying to do. People in Iron Ridge don't care about one ranch. They will if it means Hale gets control of the water. That creek feeds half the valley. He gets it. He can charge whatever he wants for access." Eleanor's voice hardened. "That's not just our problem. That's everyone's problem." Caleb stared at her. "You want to turn this into a range war?" "I want to turn this into a community issue. There's a difference." Rose nodded slowly. "Eleanor's right. If Hale controls the water, he controls everything. People would pay attention to that. Or they'd side with him because he's got money and influence and we're just dirt farmers barely hanging on." "Maybe," Eleanor conceded, "but it's worth trying. What else have we got?" Caleb looked between his wife and daughter, both of them standing fierce and ready to fight. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite hope, but not quite despair either. "All right," he said. "We fight." They spent the next week preparing. Eleanor baked pies and bread, put on her best dress, and went calling on every ranch family within 20 miles. She brought food, asked after health and children, and casually mentioned Vernon Hale's water scheme. The reactions were mixed. Some families were sympathetic. Others thought Caleb had brought this on himself through poor management. A few sided openly with Hale, figuring it was better to befriend a rich man than defend a failing neighbor. But enough people listened. Enough people started asking questions. Eleanor was at the Morrison Ranch, 3 valleys over, when Mrs. Morrison said, "You know he's planning something bigger, don't you?" Eleanor set down her coffee cup. "What do you mean?" "Vernon Hale. He's been buying up land all over the county. Not just ranches. Mills, stores, the bank." Mrs. Morrison lowered her voice. "My husband says Hale wants to control everything from the ridge to the railroad. Anyone who won't sell gets squeezed out." "How does he squeeze them out?" "Lawsuits. Debts called in early. Suddenly your credit's no good at the mercantile. Your cattle get sick from poisoned water. Your barn catches fire and the sheriff says it's an accident." Mrs. Morrison met Eleanor's eyes. 3 families have left the county in the past year because of Hale. Nobody talks about it, but everybody knows. Eleanor's blood ran cold. "Why doesn't anyone stop him?" "How?" "He owns the bank, owns the judge's debt, owns half the county commissioners. You can't fight someone who owns the system." "Then we change the system." Mrs. Morrison laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "You can't. We're just ranch wives and dirt farmers. We've got no power." "We've got numbers, and we've got nothing left to lose." Eleanor stood. "Thank you for the coffee, Mrs. Morrison, and for the truth." She rode back to the ranch with a plan forming. It was dangerous. It was probably stupid. But it was the only card they had left to play. That night, she told Caleb everything. "He's trying to build an empire," she finished. "Our ranch is just one piece. If we go down without fighting, every other family in the valley is next." Caleb was quiet for a long time. "What are you proposing?" "We expose him, publicly, at the county meeting next week. Get everyone together and force the commissioners to take a stand. They won't stand against Hale. He owns them." "Maybe, but they still have to get elected. And if enough people are angry enough, even bought politicians have to pretend to care." "It's a long shot." "I know. He'll come after us harder, make an example of us." "I know that too." Eleanor took his hand. "But I'd rather go down swinging than roll over and die quiet." Caleb studied her face in the lamplight. "You're fearless, you know that?" "I'm terrified. I'm just too stubborn to let it stop me." He pulled her close, kissed her hard. "Then let's be terrified together." The county meeting was held in the town hall, a drafty building that smelled like old cigars and older grudges. Eleanor walked in with Caleb, Rose, and Ivy, her head high despite the stares. She'd worn her best dress, mended her stockings, and braided her hair into submission. But she was still too big, too loud, too much for a room full of proper town ladies who whispered behind their hands. Vernon Hale sat in the front row, flanked by lawyers and looking like a man who'd already won. The meeting droned through regular business: water rights, road maintenance, tax assessments. Eleanor waited, her heart pounding, until the chairman asked if there was any new business from the floor. She stood. "I have something to say." The room went quiet. The chairman, a thin man named Porter who owed Hale money according to Mrs. Morrison, frowned. "This is a public forum, Mrs. Mercer, but we do ask that comments be relevant to county business." "This is relevant. Vernon Hale is trying to steal my family's ranch through a fraudulent water rights claim, and I want everyone here to know that we're not the first and we won't be the last." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Hale's face remained calm, amused even. "Mrs. Mercer," Chairman Porter said sharply, "that's a serious accusation. Do you have proof?" "I have his threats. I have documents that show he's been systematically buying up properties across the county, and I have testimony from families who've been forced out." Eleanor looked directly at Hale. "What I want to know is why the county is allowing one man to build a monopoly on land and water." "Because I'm doing it legally," Hale said smoothly, standing. "Mrs. Mercer is understandably upset about losing her ranch, but her husband's financial mismanagement is not my problem. The water rights claim is based on properly surveyed boundaries. If she has evidence to the contrary, she should present it through proper legal channels." "We can't afford lawyers," Eleanor shot back. "You know that. That's why you're doing this. You target families who can't fight back. I target properties that make economic sense. That's called business. It's called theft dressed up in legal language. The room erupted. Some people shouted agreement. Others defended Hale. Chairman Porter banged his gavel uselessly. Into the chaos, a new voice spoke. I have something to say. Everyone turned. A weathered rancher named Garrett stood, hat in his hands. Hale did the same thing to me 2 years ago, said my northern boundary was wrong, that I'd been grazing cattle on his land. Took me to court, bankrupted me with legal fees, and bought my place for half what it was worth. He looked around the room. I didn't speak up then because I was ashamed I'd lost my family's ranch. But Mrs. Mercer's right. We can't keep quiet anymore. Another woman stood, then another rancher. One by one, people began speaking up. Stories of pressure and threats and mysterious accidents. Stories of Hale's reach extending into every corner of the county. Vernon Hale's face finally lost its smug composure. This is a coordinated attack on my character, he said coldly. Chairman Porter, I demand you shut this down. I'm afraid I can't, Porter said, and for the first time, Eleanor saw something like backbone in the man. These are serious allegations. They need to be heard. Then I'll have my lawyers sue every person in this room for slander. Go ahead, Eleanor said. We've got nothing left for you to take. You've already made sure of that. Hale's eyes narrowed. You think you're clever, don't you? Playing the victim, stirring up the rabble. But you're forgetting something, Mrs. Mercer. You're fighting a battle you can't win. Maybe, but at least I'm fighting. He smiled then, cold and sharp as a knife. We'll see how brave you are when child services comes for those girls. The room went dead silent. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. What did you say? I said, someone should investigate whether 2 traumatized children are being properly cared for in a home that's about to be foreclosed on, whether they're being exposed to unstable influences and inappropriate living conditions. Hale's voice dripped false concern. It would be a shame if they had to be removed for their own safety. Rose gasped. Ivy grabbed Eleanor's hand, her small fingers ice cold. Caleb started forward, murder in his eyes, but Eleanor caught his arm. Her mind was racing. This was the real threat, the one that could actually destroy them. You're going to use the county to take our children, she said flatly. I'm going to ensure those children are protected from a household in crisis. It's my civic duty. Hale gathered his papers. Enjoy your ranch while you still have it, Mercer, and enjoy your daughters while they're still yours. He left the meeting hall, his lawyers trailing behind like vultures. The crowd erupted into arguments. Some people defended Hale's right to question the children's welfare. Others were horrified at the naked threat. Chairman Porter banged his gavel until it splintered. Eleanor stood frozen, her worst nightmare unfolding. She'd survived losing Thomas, losing her home, losing everything. But losing Rose and Ivy? That would break her. That would kill her. We have to go, Caleb said urgently. Now. They fled the meeting hall, the girls silent and scared between them. The ride back to the ranch felt like the longest journey of Eleanor's life. When they finally reached home, Caleb locked the doors like that would somehow keep the county away. He can't really take them, can he? Rose asked, her voice small and young. We're not in danger. We're happy here. Happy doesn't matter to men like Hale, Caleb said bitterly. He'll manufacture evidence, find some corrupt county official to sign papers, and we'll have to fight it in a court system he already owns. Eleanor paced the kitchen, her mind working furiously. We need leverage, something that makes him back off. We don't have leverage. We have $1,800 and a failing ranch. Then we find some. How? Eleanor stopped pacing. I don't know yet, but there has to be something, some weakness, some secret he doesn't want exposed. People like Hale don't have weaknesses. They have money, which is better than armor. Everyone has weaknesses. Eleanor's jaw set. We just have to find his. The next 3 days were a blur of fear and preparation. Eleanor sent Rose to stay with the Morrisons, figuring she'd be safer off the ranch if county officials came sniffing around. Ivy refused to leave Eleanor's side, clinging like a shadow. And Caleb worked himself into exhaustion, trying to find something, anything, that could help them. On the 4th day, salvation came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Morrison arrived at the ranch with a thin man in tow, nervous and twitchy as a rabbit. This is James Whitley, she said. He used to work for Vernon Hale. He has something to tell you. Whitley wrung his hat in his hands. I kept the books for Mr. Hale's operations, did his accounting for 5 years. And, Caleb prompted, and I know where he keeps the real records. The ones that show how he's been manipulating property surveys, bribing county officials, and falsifying documents to steal land. Whitley swallowed hard. I made copies before he fired me last month. I've been too scared to do anything with them, but Mrs. Morrison said you could use them. Eleanor's heart leapt. You have proof? Real proof? Enough to put him in prison if the right people see it. Whitley pulled out a leather satchel stuffed with papers. It's all here. Forged surveys, bribed officials, payments to arsonists, everything. Caleb took the satchel with shaking hands. Why are you giving this to us? Because I'm tired of being scared, and because what he's planning to do to your children. Whitley's voice broke. I've got kids of my own. I can't let that stand. Eleanor wanted to kiss the man. Instead, she grabbed his shoulders and said, Thank you. You might have just saved our family. Don't thank me yet. Hale will come after me when he finds out. Then we'd better move fast. They worked through the night, Eleanor and Caleb poring over Whitley's documents. The evidence was damning. Lists of officials on Hale's payroll, surveyor reports that had been altered, even a letter discussing the plan to frame the Mercers as unfit parents. This is it, Eleanor breathed. This is how we win. If we can get it in front of someone who isn't already bought, Caleb cautioned, the local judge won't touch it. Then we go higher, state level. We take this to the Capitol if we have to. That takes time we don't have. The custody hearing is in 2 days. Eleanor's stomach dropped. She'd forgotten. In all the chaos, she'd actually forgotten that they were supposed to appear before a county magistrate to determine if Rose and Ivy should be removed from their care. Then we make our stand at that hearing, she said. We bring these documents. We expose everything. And we force them to choose between justice and corruption in front of the whole county. That's dangerous. If the magistrate sides with Hale anyway, then we lose everything, and at least we tried. Eleanor met her husband's eyes. I'm not going down without fighting for those girls, Caleb. I'd burn the whole county down first. He cupped her face in his hands. I know you would. That's why I love you. They kissed, desperate and fierce, drawing strength from each other. Then they went back to preparing for war. The custody hearing was held in the same drafty town hall where Eleanor had made her accusations. But this time, the room was packed. Word had spread. People came from ranches 30 miles away to watch Vernon Hale try to take 2 children from their father. The magistrate was a county judge named Blackwell, old and crusty, and rumored to be one of Hale's men. He sat behind a makeshift bench looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. This is an informal hearing, he announced, to determine the welfare of Rose and Ivy Mercer. Mr. Hale has filed a complaint suggesting that the current home environment is unsuitable for minor children. Hale's lawyer stood, a slick man from the city. Your Honor, we have evidence that the Mercer household is in financial crisis. The property is about to be foreclosed. The children have been exposed to instability and conflict, and the new stepmother has only been in their lives for a few months. We question whether this is a safe environment. That's ridiculous, Eleanor said loudly. Mrs. Mercer, you'll have your chance to speak, Judge Blackwell said. Will I? Because it seems like you've already decided. Murmurs ran through the crowd. The judge's face reddened. I assure you, this hearing will be conducted fairly. Then let's start by asking why Vernon Hale cares so much about 2 children who aren't his. The lawyer smiled. Mr. Hale is simply a concerned citizen who believes children deserve stable homes. Mr. Hale is a land thief trying to steal our ranch, and he's using our daughters as leverage, Eleanor shot back. And I can prove it. She pulled out Whitley's documents, held them up for the room to see. What is that? Judge Blackwell demanded. Evidence. Real evidence. Not fabricated concerns about welfare, but actual documented proof that Vernon Hale has been systematically stealing land through fraud, bribery, and intimidation, including this hearing. Hale stood, his face pale. Those are stolen private documents. They're inadmissible. They're the truth, and everyone in this room deserves to hear it. Eleanor began reading. Names of officials Hale had bribed, amounts paid, properties stolen through falsified surveys. The room erupted into chaos as people recognized names, connected dots, understood the scope of the conspiracy. Judge Blackwell banged his gavel. Mrs. Mercer, I'm ordering you to stop. No, Eleanor said simply. I'm going to read every single page, and you're going to listen. Because if you rule against us after hearing this, everyone will know you're complicit. I'll hold you in contempt. Good. Arrest me. Take me to jail. But these documents will still exist. The truth will still be out there. Into the chaos, a small voice spoke. I want to talk. Everyone turned. Ivy stood on a chair so people could see her, her face pale but determined. Sweetheart, you don't have to, Eleanor said gently. Yes, I do. Ivy looked directly at Judge Blackwell. Mr. Hale is lying. Our home isn't bad. It's good. Eleanor saved my life. She climbed into a breaking barn to rescue me when she could have died. She makes Papa smile again. She taught Rose how to cry. She makes us feel safe for the first time since Mama died. Tears were streaming down the child's face, but her voice stayed steady. If you take us away, you're not protecting us. You're punishing us for being happy. And that's not fair. That's not right. And everyone in this room knows it. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Rose stood. My sister's right. Everything she said is true. Eleanor's not perfect. Sometimes she burns dinner, sometimes she's too loud. But she stayed when everyone else ran. She fought when we'd given up. And she's the best mother we could have asked for. The girl's voice broke. Please don't take us away from her. Please. Judge Blackwell looked around the packed room. At the faces watching him. At the documents Eleanor still held. At two children begging not to be torn from their home. For a long moment, nobody breathed. Then the judge said quietly, Mr. Hale, I'm dismissing this complaint. The children are remaining with their father and stepmother. The room erupted into cheers. Hale surged to his feet. This is outrageous. I'll appeal to the state. You do that, Blackwell said, his voice hard. And while you're at it, you might want to answer some questions about these documents Mrs. Mercer has been reading, because if even half of what's in there is true, you've got bigger problems than one ranch. He stood, gathered his things, and left the hall without another word. Eleanor collapsed into her chair, shaking. They'd won. Impossibly, against all odds, they'd actually won. Caleb pulled her into his arms, Rose and Ivy piling on top of them in a tangle of relief and tears. Around them, people were already talking about Hale's crimes, about investigations, about justice finally being served. Vernon Hale stood alone at the front of the room, his empire crumbling around him. He met Eleanor's eyes across the chaos, and she saw naked hatred there. This wasn't over. He'd come after them again, she knew. Men like Hale didn't forgive public humiliation. But for now, in this moment, they'd saved their family. And that was enough. The victory lasted exactly 3 days. Eleanor was hanging laundry on the line, her hands red from the cold wash water, when she saw the rider coming up the mountain road. Not Hale this time. Someone official, carrying papers that could only mean trouble. Caleb, she called, but he was already coming out of the barn, his face set. The man dismounted, tipped his hat. Mr. Mercer, I'm here from First Bank of Iron Ridge. I have a notice regarding your outstanding loan. Eleanor's stomach dropped. In all the chaos with Hale and the custody hearing, they'd almost forgotten about the banknote, almost convinced themselves they had more time. It's not due until April, Caleb said. That's correct. However, the bank has invoked an acceleration clause due to concerns about the property's declining value and ongoing legal disputes. The man handed over an envelope. You have 30 days to pay the full amount or the property will be foreclosed and sold at auction. 30 days? The agreement was April. The agreement also contained provisions allowing the bank to call the loan early under certain circumstances. Mr. Hale, as the primary stakeholder in the bank, felt that recent events warranted such action. The messenger's face was carefully neutral. I'm sorry, Mr. Mercer. It's just business. He rode away, leaving them standing in the yard with a piece of paper that might as well have been a death sentence. Eleanor took the notice from Caleb's shaking hands, read it through twice. $3,000, due in 30 days. The date was February 15th. They had until March 17th. He's not done with us, she said quietly. The hearing didn't stop him. It just made him angrier. Caleb's face was gray. We've got 1,800. Even if we sold every cow, every horse, every stick of furniture, we'd still come up short. Then we find another way. There is no other way, Eleanor. We're out of options, out of time, out of... His voice broke. We're going to lose everything. Eleanor grabbed his shoulders, made him look at her. No, we're going to fight, same as we've been doing. We didn't come this far to quit now. Fighting doesn't pay banknotes. Maybe not, but giving up guarantees we lose. She released him, her mind already spinning through possibilities. We've got 30 days. That's long enough to figure something out. Figure what out? We can't make $1,200 appear from nowhere. Eleanor looked at the ranch spread out around them. The house that needed paint, the barn that leaned, the fields brown and dormant under winter's grip. Everything was worn, used up, barely holding together. But it was theirs. And she'd be damned if she'd hand it over to Vernon Hale without exhausting every option first. That night, after the girls were asleep, Eleanor and Caleb sat at the kitchen table with the ledger spread between them. The numbers didn't lie. They had Eleanor's $1,800 in gold. Caleb had maybe 200 more from cattle sales over the winter. Even if they sold off their breeding stock, they'd get another 300 or 400 at most. We're still 700 short, Caleb said, running the numbers for the 5th time like they might change. Minimum. What about taking on debt, borrowing from someone else? Who's going to lend money to people about to lose their ranch? And even if someone would, we'd just be trading one debt for another. Eleanor tapped her fingers on the table, thinking. What if we took jobs? Both of us. Working in town through spring. And leave the ranch? The cattle would die. The property would fall apart even faster. Caleb shook his head. Besides, there's no work in Iron Ridge that pays enough to matter. Not in 30 days. They sat in heavy silence. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The fire in the stove needed stoking, but neither of them moved. There has to be something we're not seeing, Eleanor said finally. Some asset we haven't counted. We've counted everything, trust me. Eleanor stood, paced the small kitchen. Her mind kept circling back to the same impossible math. 1,800 plus 200 plus maybe 400 more. 2,400 at absolute best. Still 600 short of the 3,000 they needed. Unless... She stopped pacing. The land itself, what's it worth? More than 3,000. Probably 5 or 6, with the water rights and timber. Caleb's face was bitter. That's why Hale wants it so bad. He'll buy it at auction for pennies on the dollar and turn around and sell it for a fortune. But if we could sell it ourselves first, for real market value? We can't sell it. The bank owns it until the note's paid. What if we sold part of it? Just enough to raise the money we need, then paid off the bank and kept the rest? Caleb stared at her. We'd need a buyer who could close fast, someone with cash who wouldn't ask too many questions about why we're selling in a hurry. Is there anyone like that around here? Maybe. Old Jim Hutchins has been wanting to expand his timber operation. He's got cash from last year's harvest. Caleb's expression shifted from despair to something that might have been hope. We could sell him the northern section, the part that's mostly forest. We don't run cattle up there anyway. How much would that bring? If he paid fair value, maybe 1,000, possibly 1,200 if we drove a hard bargain. Eleanor did the math in her head. 1,800 plus 200 plus 400 from cattle plus 1,000 from land. That was 3,400, just barely enough with nothing to spare. It could work, she breathed. If Hutchins will buy. If we can sell the cattle fast enough. If nothing else goes wrong in the next 30 days. Caleb's hope was already fading. That's a lot of ifs. Better than no ifs at all. Eleanor sat back down, took his hands. We can do this. We've beaten worse odds. Have we? We're still here, aren't we? Still together, still fighting. She squeezed his fingers. I believe we can save this place, Caleb. I have to believe it. Because the alternative is giving up, and I don't know how to do that anymore. He looked at her like she was something miraculous and terrifying at the same time. You never learned to quit, did you? My mother used to say that Graves women are too stubborn to know when we're beaten. Eleanor smiled slightly. Turns out she was right. You're a Mercer now. Then I guess Mercer women are just as stubborn. He pulled her close, kissed her hard. All right, we'll try it your way, but if this doesn't work, it'll work. It has to. They started the next morning. Caleb rode down to talk to Jim Hutchins about the timberland while Eleanor began the grim task of sorting through everything they owned to figure out what could be sold. Rose helped, though she kept stopping to cry over items that had belonged to her mother. "We don't have to sell this," Eleanor said gently, watching Rose hold a delicate teacup painted with roses. "Some things are worth more than money, but we need the money. We need enough money, not all the money." Eleanor took the teacup, set it carefully aside. "That's worth maybe 50 cents at auction. Your memories of your mother drinking tea from it? That's priceless. Keep it." Rose hugged her suddenly, fiercely. "I don't want to lose this place." "Neither do I, Sweet Pea. So we're going to fight like hell to keep it." By the time Caleb returned that evening, Eleanor had sorted their possessions into 2 piles, necessary and sellable. The sellable pile was depressingly small. "Hutchins will buy the timberland," Caleb announced, and Eleanor's heart leapt. "But he can only pay $800. Says that's all the cash he's got until his spring contracts come through." Eleanor's hope crashed. 800 instead of 1,000. That put them 200 short. "Can we negotiate higher?" "I tried. He won't budge." "Then we find another 200 somewhere else." Rose spoke up from the corner where she'd been quietly listening. "I have something." Both adults turned to look at her. The girl stood, went to her room, and came back carrying a wooden box. Inside was a collection of jewelry. Nothing expensive, but pretty things: a silver locket, pearl earrings, a bracelet set with small stones that caught the light. "These were Mama's," Rose said, her voice shaking. "Papa gave them to her before I was born. They're the nicest things we own." "Rose, no," Caleb said immediately. "Those are yours. Your inheritance. What good is inheritance if we don't have a home?" The girl set the box on the table. "Mama would understand. She'd want us to fight for the ranch." Eleanor's throat closed up. "Sweetheart, this is too much to ask." "You're not asking. I'm offering." Rose met Eleanor's eyes. "You gave up everything to come here. Your old life, your security, all of it. The least I can do is give up some jewelry." "But these are your mother's, bah, and she's dead." "I know that sounds harsh, but it's true. She's gone. And these are just things. Pretty things, but things." Rose's voice strengthened. "If we lose the ranch, I lose her memory anyway. All the places she walked, the kitchen where she cooked, the garden she planted. I'd rather save those and lose the jewelry." Caleb made a sound like he'd been punched. "Mary would be so proud of you right now." "Then let me do this, Papa. Please." He pulled his daughter into his arms, and they held each other while they cried. Eleanor looked away, giving them privacy, and found Ivy standing in the doorway. The little girl was holding something small and brass. Her collection of thimbles, Eleanor realized, the ones that had belonged to her grandmother. "Ivy, no," Eleanor said softly. "You love those." "I love our family more." Ivy set the thimbles on the table next to her mother's jewelry. "How much do we need?" Eleanor's eyes blurred with tears. These children, these impossible, brave, generous children who understood sacrifice better than most adults. "We need every bit we can get," she admitted. Ivy nodded solemnly. "Then take them." That night, Eleanor lay awake next to Caleb, staring at the ceiling and doing math in her head. 1,800 in gold, 200 from winter cattle sales, 800 from the timberland. The jewelry might bring 300 if they were lucky. The thimbles maybe 20. They still needed to sell the breeding stock, which would break Caleb's heart but had to be done. She was up to 3,200 in her calculations when Caleb spoke in the darkness. "I have something too." Eleanor turned to look at him. "What?" "A pocket watch. Sterling silver. Belonged to my grandfather. It's worth maybe 200 if I can find the right buyer." His voice was rough. "I've been carrying it every day since he died. Figured I'd pass it to my son someday, except I don't have a son, and probably never will." "Caleb, you don't have to—" "Oh, yes I do. The girls are giving up their treasures. I can't do less." He pulled her close. "Besides, what good is a watch if we don't have time? We lose this ranch. We lose everything. I'd rather have a future without the watch than a watch without a future." Eleanor pressed her face against his chest, overwhelmed. "We're all sacrificing everything we have because we believe in what we're building here. This family, this life." His arms tightened around her. "That's worth more than silver and gold." "I hope you're right." "So do I." The next 3 weeks were brutal. Caleb drove the cattle to market, selling off breeding stock they'd spent years developing. Eleanor took the jewelry and watch to 3 different towns, negotiating with pawnbrokers and jewelers until she got the best prices she could. Rose and Ivy sorted through every item in the house, finding things to sell that Eleanor would have kept. It all went into a strong box in Caleb's room. Every dollar, every cent, carefully counted and recounted. By March 10th, 1 week before the deadline, they had $2,943. They were still $57 short. Eleanor stared at the money spread across the kitchen table and wanted to scream. They'd sold everything, sacrificed everything, come so close, and it still wasn't enough. "We could try to negotiate with the bank," Caleb said without much hope. "Maybe they'd accept a partial payment and extend the deadline." "Hale owns the bank. He's not going to negotiate." "Then what do we do?" Eleanor looked around the kitchen. There was nothing left to sell. The furniture was worn and worthless. The dishes were cheap tin. Even her sewing machine, the one thing she'd brought from her old life, was broken and had been for months. "Wait. The sewing machine," she said suddenly. "It's broken, Eleanor. Nobody's going to buy it. It's a Singer, top of the line, or it was 10 years ago. Thomas spent a fortune on it." Eleanor stood, went to the corner where the machine sat gathering dust. "If I can fix it, it's worth at least $50, maybe more to the right buyer." "You said it's been broken for months." "Because I didn't have time to fix it, didn't have reason to." She ran her hand over the tarnished metal. "But if it means saving the ranch," she spent the next 4 days taking the machine apart, cleaning every piece, replacing the broken belt with one she fashioned from leather scraps. Her hands cramped, her eyes burned, but slowly, painstakingly, the machine came back to life. On March 14th, 3 days before the deadline, Eleanor loaded the sewing machine into the wagon and drove to Iron Ridge alone. The general store owner looked at the machine skeptically. "I don't know, Mrs. Mercer. Not much call for sewing machines out here. It's worth $75 easy. I'll take 60. "I'll give you 30. Eleanor's heart sank. 50. Final offer. 35. She wanted to argue, wanted to plead, but the man's face said he knew exactly how desperate she was and planned to take advantage of it. "Fine," Eleanor said, hating herself. 35. She took the money and drove home with an empty wagon and a heavy heart. They were still $22 short. That night, she told Caleb the truth. "We're not going to make it. We could beg, ask for donations from the families we helped. We can't ask people to give us money they don't have. Half the county is struggling just like us." "Then we're out of options." Caleb's voice was flat. "We fought as hard as we could. It wasn't enough." Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to find some magical solution, but there was nothing left. No hidden assets, no secret savings. They'd scraped together every penny they could and fallen short. They sat in silence, holding hands across the table while the clock ticked toward midnight and their future crumbled. The next morning, Eleanor woke with an idea so desperate it bordered on insane. "I'm going to see Vernon Hale," she announced. Caleb nearly dropped his coffee cup. "Absolutely not. He's the only one with money, the only one who could help us. He's the reason we're in this mess. He accelerated the loan to destroy us." "I know, but maybe if I talk to him, explain what? That we're beaten? That he won?" Caleb's face was hard. "He'll laugh in your face, Eleanor. Or worse." "Maybe, but I have to try." She rode down the mountain before he could stop her, before her own fear could talk her out of it. The journey to Hale's estate took 2 hours. The house was enormous, ostentatious, a monument to wealth built on other people's suffering. A servant answered the door. "Mr. Hale is not receiving visitors." "Tell him Eleanor Mercer is here. He'll see me." The servant looked doubtful but disappeared inside. 5 minutes later he returned. "Mr. Hale will give you 5 minutes." Vernon Hale sat in a study lined with books he'd probably never read, sipping brandy at 10 in the morning like a man who'd never had to work a day in his life. "Mrs. Mercer," he said without standing. "Come to beg." Eleanor forced herself to stay calm. "I came to make a deal." "What could you possibly have that I want? I'll own your ranch in 3 days anyway. You'll own it at auction for a fraction of what it's worth. I'm offering to sell it to you directly, right now, for $3,000. Hale laughed. Why would I pay full price when I can wait 3 days and get it for pennies? Because I'll make sure everyone knows you bought it fairly, that you weren't the reason we lost it. You get the land without the scandal. I don't care about scandal. You should. The state's already investigating your business practices thanks to those documents we released. You keep stealing ranches and you'll end up in prison. Eleanor leaned forward. This way, you get what you want and I get to walk away with dignity. Everybody wins. Hale studied her over his brandy glass. You really think I'd let you walk away after what you did? After you humiliated me in front of the whole county? I think you're a businessman who makes calculated decisions. This is the smart play. The smart play is watching you lose everything the way I planned. He set down his glass. Your 5 minutes are up. Get out of my house. Eleanor stood, her last hope dying. You're going to regret this. Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, I'm getting exactly what I want. Your ranch, your water rights, and the satisfaction of knowing I broke you. Hale smiled. That last part might be worth more than the property itself. Eleanor walked out before she did something stupid like throwing his expensive brandy in his smug face. The ride home was the longest of her life. She'd failed, tried everything, sacrificed everything, and failed anyway. When she reached the ranch, she found Caleb, Rose, and Ivy sitting on the porch waiting for her. They knew without asking how it had gone. Eleanor's face said it all. I'm sorry, she whispered. I tried. I really tried. Rose started crying. Ivy buried her face in Eleanor's skirt, and Caleb just looked broken. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay awake doing the same impossible math over and over. $2,978. They needed $3,000, $22 short. So close. So impossibly, heartbreakingly close. She got up quietly, went downstairs, and pulled out Thomas's letter one more time. Reread his words about finding a place worth fighting for. They'd fought. They'd given everything, and it still wasn't enough. Eleanor was putting the letter away when something caught her eye. A slight bulge in the bottom of the leather pouch where the gold had been. She turned it inside out and found a small hidden pocket sewn into the lining. Inside were 3 more gold coins. Eleanor's hands shook as she counted them. $20 each, $60 total. They had enough. They actually had enough. She started laughing, crying, making sounds that were barely human. The noise woke Caleb, who came running downstairs thinking something was wrong. We have it, Eleanor gasped, holding up the coins. Thomas hid extra. We have enough to save the ranch. Caleb stared at the gold like it might disappear. Then he grabbed Eleanor and spun her around, both of them laughing like maniacs. Rose and Ivy appeared on the stairs, confused and sleepy. What's happening? We're going to be okay, Eleanor said, tears streaming down her face. We're actually going to be okay. They counted the money again to be sure. $3,038. More than enough. The next morning, March 17th, the entire family rode into Iron Ridge together. They walked into the bank carrying a strong box full of cash and gold and asked to see the manager. The manager, a nervous man named Phillips, who clearly knew he was doing Hale's dirty work, counted the money 3 times. This is the full amount, he said, sounding disappointed. Plus $38 extra, Eleanor said sweetly. For your trouble. Phillips wrote out a receipt, stamped the loan as paid in full, and handed over the deed to the ranch. Just like that, it was done. They walked out into the spring sunshine as free people. The ranch was theirs. Truly, completely theirs. Vernon Hale was waiting on the street outside. I underestimated you, he said to Eleanor, his voice cold. Yes, she agreed. You did. This isn't over. Actually, it is. We paid the debt. The ranch is ours, and there's nothing you can do about it. We'll see about that. Hale tipped his hat with mock courtesy. Enjoy your victory while it lasts, Mrs. Mercer. I'm a patient man. He walked away, and Eleanor felt a chill despite the warm spring air. He meant it. This wasn't over for him. But for now, in this moment, they'd won. Caleb pulled Eleanor close. Let's go home. Yeah, she said, smiling through tears. Let's go home. They rode back up the mountain as a family, the deed to the ranch safe in Caleb's pocket, and hope alive again in their hearts. The road was still hard. The work was still endless. Money would always be tight, and winters would always be brutal, but they'd faced the worst and survived, and that made them stronger than any amount of gold ever could. Spring came late to Iron Ridge that year, but when it finally arrived, it came with a fury that made up for lost time. Snow melted into rushing creeks, brown grass turned green overnight, and the whole mountain seemed to wake up hungry for life. Eleanor stood in the kitchen garden, hands deep in soil that was finally warm enough to work, and felt something settle in her chest that had been restless since Thomas died. Peace, maybe. Or just the simple satisfaction of knowing that this dirt belonged to her, that these seeds she was planting would grow in ground nobody could take away. "You're getting mud everywhere," Rose observed from the porch steps, but she was smiling. "Good. Means I'm doing it right." Eleanor wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving a streak of dirt. "You going to help or just sit there judging?" Rose came down, knelt beside her, and started making holes for bean seeds. The girl had grown 3 inches over the winter and was all awkward limbs and changing voice now. 15 looked good on her, Eleanor thought. The anger had burned down to something manageable, something that fueled ambition instead of destruction. "Mrs. Morrison stopped by yesterday while you were in town," Rose said casually. "Said the school board is looking for a new teacher come fall. You thinking about it?" "Maybe. I'm good at reading, good at explaining things." Rose planted a seed, covered it carefully. "And I like the idea of helping kids who feel stuck. Kids like I was." Eleanor's throat tightened. "You'd be a wonderful teacher." "You think Papa would let me? It means living in town during the week." "I think your Papa would let you do anything that makes you happy. He's learned that trying to hold on too tight just drives people away." Rose was quiet for a moment. "Is that what happened with you and your husband? He held on too tight?" Eleanor paused, considering how to answer. She'd learned that Rose asked the hard questions when she needed to hear hard truths, not comfortable lies. "Thomas and I held on to the wrong things," Eleanor said slowly. "We held on to pride when we should have asked for help, held on to stubbornness when we should have been flexible. By the time we figured out what actually mattered, we were drowning in debt and he was dying from fever." She planted another seed. "The holding on wasn't the problem, it was what we chose to hold on to." "What should we hold on to?" "Each other, the people who matter. Everything else is just details." Rose nodded like that made sense, and they worked in companionable silence until Ivy came running from the barn, her dress muddy and her face flushed with excitement. "Papa says the calves are coming. 3 of them already and more on the way." Eleanor and Rose exchanged a look. The spring calving was always chaos, but it was the good kind. The kind that meant the ranch was recovering, rebuilding, becoming what it should be. "Better go help," Eleanor said, standing and brushing dirt from her knees. "Garden can wait." They spent the next 2 days in the barn, helping deliver calves and making sure the new mothers didn't reject their babies. It was messy, exhausting work that left Eleanor's back aching and her clothes ruined. But watching those wobbly-legged calves stand for the first time, watching the herd grow, made every bit of it worthwhile. "We're going to be all right, aren't we?" Caleb said on the second night, both of them too tired to make it to the house and sleeping in the hay instead. "We already are all right," Eleanor said. "This is just us getting better." He pulled her close despite the hay and the smell and the complete lack of romance. "I love you. You know that? I figured it out somewhere around the time you married me. I mean it, though. Really mean it. Not just because you saved the ranch or helped the girls or any of that. Just because you're you." His voice dropped. "You're the strongest person I've ever met, Eleanor Mercer, and I thank whatever force in the universe brought you up that mountain." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm not that strong. I was terrified the whole time. Being scared and doing it anyway is the definition of strong." "Then I guess we're both strong. Because you were scared too and you kept going." "Had to. You wouldn't let me quit." "Damn right I wouldn't." They fell asleep in the hay like a couple of farmhands, which is exactly what they were. In the morning, Eleanor woke with straw in her hair and a crick in her neck, and more contentment than she'd felt in years. Vernon Hale's revenge came in May, subtle and devastating. It started with the water. The creek that ran through their property started running slower, then barely trickling. By the 3rd day, it had stopped completely. Caleb rode upstream to investigate and came back white-faced. "Hale built a dam on his property, technically legal, but it's diverting all the water away from our land." "Can he do that?" "Apparently. His lawyers made sure it was just inside the bounds of legality. Caleb's jaw was tight. Without water, we can't sustain the cattle through summer. They'll die or we'll have to sell them off at a loss. Eleanor felt rage flood through her, hot and sharp. So he's going to bleed us dry slowly instead of taking the ranch outright. Looks like it. What are our options? Sue him, which we can't afford. Build our own well, which we also can't afford. Or sell out before we lose everything. Caleb sat heavily at the table. He's got us cornered, Eleanor. He learned from last time. This is airtight. Eleanor paced the kitchen, thinking furiously. There had to be a way. There was always a way if you looked hard enough. What if we don't fight him directly, she said slowly. What if we go around him? How? The Morrison Ranch. They've got water to spare and their land borders ours on the east side. What if we ran a pipe from their creek to ours? Shared water? Caleb's eyes widened. That's a 2-mile pipe at least. Cost a fortune we don't have. We don't need a fortune. We need neighbors willing to help each other. Eleanor grabbed her shawl. I'm going to talk to Mrs. Morrison. She rode out immediately, not giving herself time to second guess. The Morrison Ranch was thriving, their cattle fat and their fields green. Mrs. Morrison met her at the door with knowing eyes. Hale's dam, right? How did you know? Because he tried the same thing with the Hutchins place last year. Jim had to sell his timberland early to afford a well. Mrs. Morrison gestured Eleanor inside. What are you thinking? Eleanor laid out the plan. A shared water system. The Mercers would provide labor to dig the trench and lay the pipe. The Morrisons would provide access to their creek and help with materials. What do we get out of it? Mrs. Morrison asked. Security. If Hale can dam our water, he can dam yours too someday. But if we're connected, we've got backup. He can't control water that flows between properties. Eleanor leaned forward. Plus, you get the satisfaction of watching him fail. Mrs. Morrison smiled slowly. Tom, she called to her husband, come hear this. By the time Eleanor left that afternoon, she had a deal. The Morrisons would provide half the materials if the Mercers provided the labor and maintained the system. They'd start immediately, before Hale realized what they were doing. The work was brutal. 2 miles of trench 3 feet deep, dug by hand through rocky soil and stubborn roots. Caleb and Eleanor worked dawn to dusk, joined by Tom Morrison and his sons, and eventually by other ranchers who'd heard what they were doing and wanted to help. Jim Hutchins showed up with spare pipe. The Garretts brought tools. Even families who'd stayed neutral during the custody hearing sent food and supplies. Hale's made a lot of enemies, Tom Morrison said, wiping sweat from his face. People are tired of being scared of him. This is their way of fighting back. It took 3 weeks of backbreaking labor, but they got the pipe laid. When they finally opened the valve and water started flowing into the Mercer Creek again, Eleanor actually cried. He's going to be furious, Rose said, watching the water run. Good, Eleanor said. Let him be furious. We just proved he can't control everything. Hale showed up 2 days later, his face purple with rage. That pipe crosses property boundaries without easements. It's illegal. Actually, Eleanor said calmly, we filed all the proper paperwork with the county. Everything's legal. We learned from you about dotting I's and crossing T's. I'll sue. On what grounds? We're using water from the Morrison's Creek, not from your dam. You've got no claim. Eleanor smiled sweetly. Better luck next time, Mr. Hale. He left without another word, but his eyes promised this wasn't over. Eleanor was right to be worried. Hale's next attack was more insidious. In July, a federal land inspector showed up claiming there were discrepancies in the Mercer property boundaries. The same fraudulent survey tactic Hale had tried before, dressed up in government authority. But this time, the Mercers were ready. Eleanor had spent months gathering every land document, survey, and claim going back 3 generations. When the inspector demanded proof of ownership, she buried him in paperwork. This all appears to be in order, the inspector admitted grudgingly. It is. We made sure of it. Eleanor's voice was steel. And if Mr. Hale sends any more fake inspectors, I'll be filing harassment charges. I'm not fake, ma'am. I'm federal. Then I'm sure your superiors would be interested to know that Vernon Hale paid your travel expenses and put you up at his private hotel. Eleanor had done her homework. That's not suspicious at all. The inspector left and never came back. August brought a drought, the worst in 20 years. Creeks dried up across the valley, cattle died, crops failed. But the Mercer Ranch, with its shared water system and careful management, survived. Other ranches weren't so lucky. One by one, families started selling out, and Vernon Hale bought every property, consolidating his empire while the valley suffered. "He's winning," Rose said bitterly, watching another family pack up and leave. "Just slower than he planned." "He's winning battles," Eleanor corrected. "But we're still here. That means we haven't lost the war." September proved her right. The state investigation into Hale's business practices, the one Eleanor had triggered with James Whitley's documents, finally bore fruit. Federal marshals arrived and arrested Hale on charges of fraud, bribery, and racketeering. His assets were frozen pending trial. The whole county gathered to watch him taken away in irons, this powerful man who'd terrorized them for years, suddenly looking small and scared. "How long do you think he'll go to prison for?" Ivy asked. "Long enough," Caleb said with grim satisfaction. But Eleanor knew it wasn't that simple. Men like Hale had lawyers, connections, money hidden in places the government would never find. He'd probably buy his way out eventually or serve a light sentence in a comfortable prison. Still, for now, the valley was free of his influence. Ranches could breathe, families could rebuild, and the Mercers could finally, truly rest. The years that followed weren't easy. Ranching was never easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and broken equipment, months when money was tight and the work seemed endless. But they endured, together. Rose left for teaching college the year she turned 17, bright-eyed and determined to change the world one student at a time. She came home for summers and holidays, each time a little more confident, a little more herself. "You did that," Caleb told Eleanor, watching Rose ride away for her first term. "You showed her she could be strong." "She was always strong. I just helped her see it." Ivy grew into a quiet, thoughtful teenager who loved books more than cattle and spent hours reading aloud to Eleanor while she worked. Her voice, once lost for 3 years, became the soundtrack of the Mercer household. "You should go to school too," Eleanor told her when she was 15. "Study literature or history. You're too smart to spend your life on this mountain." "Maybe," Ivy said, "but I like it here. I like being home." "There's a whole world out there, Sweet Pea." "I know, but this is my world, the one that matters." Eleanor understood that. She'd found her own world on this mountain, after all. The place she'd run to out of desperation had become the place she couldn't imagine leaving. The ranch prospered slowly, steadily. They rebuilt the herd, fixed the barn, painted the house. Nothing happened quickly or dramatically. It was just years of consistent work, of choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier, of believing the struggle was worth it. Vernon Hale was eventually convicted and served 3 years in prison. When he was released, he sold his remaining properties and left the county in disgrace. Eleanor heard later that he'd died alone in a boarding house in Denver, all his wealth and power gone. She felt no satisfaction in his fall, just a tired sort of relief that he could never hurt anyone else. Caleb grew older gracefully, his hair going silver, his face weathering into pleasant lines. He smiled more, laughed more. The hard edges that grief had carved into him softened with time and love. "You changed my life," he told Eleanor on their 10th anniversary, a simple celebration with cake and coffee. "I was half dead when you arrived, just going through motions, and you made me remember how to live. We saved each other," Eleanor said. "You gave me a home when I had nothing, a family when I was alone, purpose when I'd lost mine." "So we're even?" "We're partners. That's better than even." They kissed in the kitchen where they'd first made their desperate bargain, where they'd counted money and cried over losses and celebrated victories. That kitchen had seen it all, weathered it all, and was still standing, just like them. Rose came home at 23 with a teaching certificate and a plan to open a school in Iron Ridge for children whose families couldn't afford to send them away. Eleanor helped her renovate an old church building, and Caleb built desks from salvaged wood. The school opened that fall with 15 students, and Rose poured everything she had into teaching them that circumstances didn't define destiny, that being poor or forgotten or written off didn't mean you couldn't rise. "She's doing what you did," Caleb observed, watching Rose work with a particularly difficult student, taking the ones nobody else wants and showing them they matter. "No," Eleanor said, "she's doing what we all should do, seeing people, really seeing them and refusing to let them disappear. Ivy surprised everyone by falling in love with the son of a neighboring rancher, a quiet boy named Matthew who loved books as much as she did. They married when she was 20 in the same kitchen where Eleanor and Caleb had wed, and built a small house on the eastern edge of the Mercer property. "I'm not losing you," Eleanor told her on her wedding day. "You're just expanding." "I'll never really leave," Ivy promised. "This is home. It'll always be home." And she kept that promise, stopping by almost daily with Matthew in tow, reading to Eleanor while she cooked, helping with the garden, being family in the way that mattered most. The years accumulated. The ranch became a fixture of the valley, known for fair dealing and hard work. Eleanor's reputation grew too. People started coming to her for advice, for help settling disputes, for perspective on problems that seemed insurmountable. "You've become the valley's wise woman," Mrs. Morrison teased one afternoon. "I'm just old and stubborn," Eleanor protested. "You're someone who survived, someone who fought when it would have been easier to quit. People respect that." Eleanor didn't feel particularly wise. She felt like someone who'd stumbled through crisis after crisis and somehow made it to the other side. But if her struggle could help someone else, she supposed that gave it meaning. She was 63 when Caleb's heart gave out one spring morning while he was checking fence line. He died the way he'd lived, working, doing what needed doing. Eleanor found him sitting against a fence post, looking peaceful, like he'd just decided to rest for a moment. The grief nearly killed her. After 15 years of marriage, he'd become so integrated into her life that his absence felt like losing a limb. She walked around Hollow for months, going through motions, unable to find joy in anything. Rose and Ivy tried to help, but grief was a solitary journey. Eleanor had to walk it alone. It was the ranch that saved her, in the end. The endless work that didn't care whether she was sad or not. Cattle that needed feeding, fences that needed mending, a garden that needed planting. She did the work because it needed doing, and slowly, over months and years, the work stitched her back together. She was 68 when Rose's school produced its first graduating class. 20 students who'd learned to read and write and think, who'd discovered they were capable of more than poverty and limitations. Eleanor sat in the audience and cried, watching these children accept their certificates with pride. This was legacy, she realized. Not land or money or buildings, but lives changed. People helped. Hope passed forward. "Mama would be proud," Ivy whispered beside her, using the name she'd called Eleanor for years now. "Your first mother would be proud too," Eleanor said. "Both of you turned out pretty remarkable." "We had a good teacher." Eleanor shook her head. "You had yourselves. I just didn't get in the way." She was 71 when her body started betraying her in small ways. Joints that ached in the morning, breath that came harder after exertion. The slow accumulation of years that reminded her she was mortal after all. Rose wanted her to move into town, somewhere easier, but Eleanor refused. "I'm dying on this ranch," she said firmly. "I fought too hard for it to leave now." "You're not dying, Mama. Everybody's dying, sweetheart. Just at different speeds. Mine's just slower than some." Eleanor smiled. "Besides, I like it here. Like waking up to mountains and falling asleep to silence. This is my place." So she stayed with Ivy checking on her daily and Rose visiting weekly, and the ranch continuing around her because work didn't stop for aging. She was 73 when she woke one morning and knew her time was running out. Not dramatically, not with pain, just a bone-deep certainty that the tank was nearly empty. Eleanor got up anyway, made coffee, and started breakfast. If these were her last days, she'd spend them doing what she'd always done. Living. Rose and Ivy came when she called them, brought their families, filled the house with the noise and chaos of life. Eleanor sat in her kitchen, surrounded by people she loved, and felt content. "I need to tell you something," she said when everyone had gathered, "about staying." They quieted, listening. "When I came here, I had nothing. No money, no prospects, no future, just desperation and a willingness to work." Eleanor looked around at these faces, these lives she'd helped shape. "This ranch saved me, but more than that, you saved me. You gave me purpose, family, reasons to wake up every morning and keep fighting." "Mama," Rose started, but Eleanor held up a hand. "Let me finish. I'm old and tired, and I might not get another chance to say this right." She took a breath. "The thing about staying is that it's not heroic. It's not dramatic. It's just the daily choice to not quit, to keep showing up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. She looked at each of them in turn. I stayed because I found something worth staying for. That's the secret nobody tells you. You don't find your place and then decide to stay. You stay, and that's what makes it your place. Ivy was crying. Rose's jaw was tight with emotion. Even the grandchildren were quiet, sensing something important. So when I'm gone, and you're facing hard things, remember that. Don't run just because it's difficult. Stay, fight, build something worth keeping. Eleanor smiled. That's what I did, and I don't regret a single moment of it. She died 3 days later in her own bed with her family around her. Her last words were to Ivy. Take care of the garden, she whispered. It needs... And then she was gone, mid-sentence, the way she'd lived. Always working, always doing, right up until the end. They buried her on the hill above the ranch, where she could look out over the valley she'd fought so hard to keep. The whole county came to the funeral. Ranchers and teachers and shopkeepers, all the people she'd helped or inspired or simply been kind to over the years. Rose gave the eulogy, her voice strong despite tears. My mother taught me that family isn't who you're born to. It's who stays, who fights, who refuses to let you fail. She looked at the assembled crowd. Eleanor Mercer stayed. For me, for Ivy, for my father, for this ranch, for this whole valley. And in staying, she showed all of us what strength really means. They placed a simple stone marker above her grave. Rose wanted something elaborate, but Ivy insisted on simplicity. The stone read, Eleanor Mercer, she was the one who stayed. 6 words that carried the weight of an entire lifetime. The ranch continued after Eleanor died. Rose eventually sold her share to Ivy and Matthew, choosing to focus on the school that had become her life's work. The Mercer property stayed in family hands, passed down through generations, each one adding their own stories to the land. But whenever someone new came to the valley, whenever someone asked about the ranch's history, the story always started the same way. There was a woman named Eleanor, they'd say. Big woman, brave woman, who came up this mountain with nothing and stayed when everyone else ran. She's the reason we're all still here. And that was true, in the ways that mattered most. Because Eleanor hadn't just saved a ranch. She'd saved a family, a community, a way of life. She'd proved that staying mattered, that fighting mattered, that one stubborn woman refusing to quit could change everything. Years later, when Rose was old herself and telling stories to her own grandchildren, she'd talk about the woman who became her mother by choice rather than blood. She was too big for the town that threw her away, Rose would say, but she was exactly the right size for the mountain that needed her. And she taught us all that being unwanted doesn't mean being unworthy. It just means you haven't found your place yet. Did she ever find hers? The children would ask. And Rose would smile, looking out over the ranch that still bore the Mercer name, at the valley that still told Eleanor's story, at the school that still taught her values. Yes, she'd say. She found it, and then she stayed, and that made all the difference. Because in the end, that was the lesson Eleanor left behind. Not that life would be easy, or fair, or kind, but that showing up mattered, staying mattered, fighting for what you loved mattered, even when you were too big, too poor, too broken, too much. Especially then. The mountain remembered Eleanor Mercer long after she was gone. The creek still ran with water she'd fought to keep. The house still stood on land she'd refused to lose. The family still gathered in the kitchen where she'd made her stand. And somewhere in the soil of that garden she'd planted, in the strength of that fence line she'd mended, in the hearts of those children she'd raised, Eleanor's spirit remained. Not as a ghost, but as a presence. A reminder that ordinary people could do extraordinary things if they were stubborn enough to stay. She was the widow nobody wanted, who became the woman everyone needed. She was the one who stayed, and that was legacy enough for anyone.